What if the gods that ancient people worshipped were never gods at all, but something that once walked among us? Creatures of light and matter, flesh and code, whose memory turns to myth when the world reset itself. The Sumerians called them the Anunnaki. The Book of Enoch named them the Watchers. Across continents and ages, every sky spoke of beings that descended, ruled, and vanished. Yet their echoes still vibrate in the stones, in our blood, in the language of stars. Tonight we listen not to prove or to believe, but to remember what the earth once knew. You are standing in the desert plains of southern Iraq, where the air hangs at 52 degrees Fahrenheit in the deep hours before dawn. The wind moves slowly here, carrying the scent of dry earth and something older, something that has no name. Beneath your feet, fragments of clay and stone scatter across the sand, remnants of Eridu, the first city, the place where civilization began. Ahead of you, a ziggurat rises from the earth like a shadow carved from stone, worn by 5,000 years but still holding a presence that presses against your chest. The Sumerians who raised these stones believed that gods descended here, that they came down from the heavens and walked among men, teaching them the order of stars, the cycle of seasons, the architecture of kingship. But here is the strange thing, the thing that makes your pulse quicken as you place your hand on the cold limestone wall. They did not speak of these beings as myths. They spoke of them as fact. You feel the texture of the stone beneath your palm, rough and ancient, each grain a witness to something your textbooks never explained. The Sumerians left records, thousands of clay tablets pressed with cuneiform script, detailing not prayers or legends, but events. Kings who ruled for impossibly long spans of time, beings who descended in objects that gleamed like copper. Instructions given in councils where decisions were made with the precision of engineers, not priests. And the word they used again and again was Anunnaki. Those who from heaven to earth came. You lift your hand from the stone and look up at the sky, where the stars are beginning to fade as the horizon turns pale. Somewhere in that vast darkness, the ancients believed, was the realm these beings came from, a place they called Anu, the sky world, a domain not of spirit, but of substance. What if they were right? What if the gods were never gods at all, but travelers, visitors, architects of a plan so vast that humanity could only interpret it through the language of worship? The air grows colder as the first light touches the desert, and you understand something. This is not a story about belief. It is a story about memory. The kind that gets buried under centuries of rewriting, of translation, of theologies that needed the past to fit a certain shape. But the stones remember. The clay remembers. And if you are still enough, quiet enough, you can hear what they are trying to say. The Sumerians were not alone. Across the world, separated by oceans and mountains and languages that never touched, other civilizations told the same story. In the highlands of Peru, in the temples of Egypt, in the valleys of the Indus, the pattern repeats. Beings from the sky, knowledge given, a great catastrophe, and then silence. As if something vast and coordinated happened to the human species. Something that left only fragments, symbols, ruins aligned to the stars. The same stars that still burn above you now. Distant and cold, but perhaps not as distant as we have been taught to believe. You open your eyes and the desert is no longer dark. The sun is rising, casting long shadows across the sand. And in that golden light, the ruins look almost alive, as if they are waiting for someone to ask the right questions, waiting for the world to be ready to hear the answers. Tonight, you are invited to walk this path, to step into the forgotten archives of the earth and hear what has been hidden, not by conspiracy, but by time, by translation, by the slow erosion of memory into myth. If you stay with me until the end, you will see something that history tried to bury, not because it was false, but because it was too true, too disruptive, too vast for the frameworks we built to contain it. And if you are listening now, wherever you are, whether the night is deep or the morning is breaking, leave a comment below. Tell me where you are, what time it is, whether the stars are visible from your window. I want to know if the light in your world feels anything like the light that once shone down on these ruins, when the sky was not empty, but full of presence, full of meaning, full of beings whose names we have almost forgotten. Because this is not just my journey, it is ours. So let us begin, you and I, together, as the sun rises over Eridu, and the wind carries with it the first whispers of a story older than nations, older than scripture, older than the very concept of gods. A story that begins not with faith, but with encounter, not with myth, but with clay, not with worship, but with wonder. The Anunnaki, the Watchers, the beings who came from the sky. Let us remember them. Chung 1, the clay tablets, records, not myths. You are standing now in a different kind of silence, one that hums with the weight of preserved knowledge. The British Museum in London, deep beneath the public galleries where tourists wander past mummies and marble friezes, there exists a vault that stretches nearly 200 feet into the earth. The temperature here is held constant at 64 degrees Fahrenheit, the air dry and still, engineered to preserve what time has tried to erase. Along the walls, metal shelves rise from floor to ceiling, each one bearing row upon row of wooden drawers. And inside those drawers, wrapped in acid-free paper, are fragments of clay older than any empire you were taught to revere. 70,000 tablets, some whole, most broken, all inscribed with the wedge-shaped marks of cuneiform, the oldest form of writing known to humanity. You walk slowly down the narrow aisle, your footsteps muffled by the thick carpet laid to protect the floor from vibration. The lighting is dim, almost reverent, and in your hands you hold a single tablet, no larger than your palm, weighing perhaps 2 pounds. It is cool to the touch, the surface rough where the stylus pressed into wet clay 4,000 years ago. And as you tilt it toward the light, the tiny wedges catch the shadows, forming words in a language that predates the Bible, predates the Greeks, predates even the concept of history as a written record. This is not poetry. This is not myth. This is a record, dry and factual, written by scribes who were documenting something they believed to be real. The tablet in your hand is a fragment of the Atrahasis epic, one of the oldest creation narratives ever recovered. And as you read the translation on the card beside it, your breath catches. It describes a time before humanity existed, when the gods themselves labored to maintain the world, digging rivers, building cities, growing weary under the burden of endless work. And so, the text says, they decided to create a solution, a new creature to bear the labor in their place. They called it Lulu, the primitive worker, fashioned from the clay of the earth and mixed with the blood of a god who was slain for that purpose. The result was Adamu, the earthling, the first human. You set the tablet down carefully and move to another drawer, pulling it open to reveal dozens more fragments, each one a piece of a puzzle scattered across millennia. Another text describes the Anunnaki in council, debating the fate of mankind after humans grew too numerous, too loud, their noise disturbing the peace of the gods. Enlil, the god of air and authority, proposes a solution, a flood, not as punishment for sin, but as a practical decision, a reset button, pressed by beings who had grown tired of their own creation. Yet one god, Enki, the wise one, the god of water and knowledge, defies the council and warns a human named Utnapishtim to build a boat to save himself and the seed of all living things. The flood comes, the world drowns, and when the waters recede, the gods realize they have made a mistake. Without humans, there is no one to feed them, no one to maintain the temples, no one to perform the rituals that sustain the cosmic order. They need humanity. And so, humanity is allowed to survive, but in diminished form, shorter-lived, less powerful, easier to control. You close the drawer and lean against the shelf, feeling the cold metal through your shirt. These stories were written 1,000 years before the Book of Genesis, yet the structure is unmistakable. The flood, the ark, the survival of one righteous man, it is all here, recorded not as divine revelation, but as history, as something that happened in the days when gods walked the earth and made decisions in council chambers, not from clouds. But there is something else, something stranger still. You move to a different section of the vault, where the astronomical tablets are kept, and here the precision becomes unsettling. The Sumerians mapped the heavens with an accuracy that would not be matched again until the invention of the telescope. They knew the orbital periods of planets, the cycles of eclipses, the precession of the equinoxes. They divided the sky into 12 sections, each one corresponding to a constellation, the same 12 we still use today as the zodiac. They knew that the Earth was round, that it orbited the sun, that there were planets beyond what the naked eye could see. How? You pull out a tablet labeled Mulapan, a star catalog that lists the risings and settings of 33 constellations across the year. The precision is staggering, the observations spanning centuries, as if the knowledge had been accumulated not by a single generation, but by a continuity of record-keeping that stretched back into an unimaginably distant past. And then there is the mention of Nibiru, a word that appears again and again in the astronomical texts, described as a wandering star, a planet whose orbit brings it near the Earth only once in a great age. Modern astronomers dismissed this as mythology until 2016, when Caltech researchers published evidence of a massive planet far beyond Neptune, a world whose gravitational influence could be detected, even though the planet itself had never been seen. They called it Planet 9. The Sumerians called it Nibiru. Coincidence? Or the echo of a knowledge older than our own? You set the tablet down and move to the final drawer, the one marked Restricted Access, the one that requires special permission, even for scholars to view. Inside, wrapped in layers of protective tissue, is a cylinder seal, a small stone carved with intricate images that, when rolled across wet clay, would leave an impression, a kind of ancient signature. You lift it carefully, holding it up to the light, and the image carved into its surface makes your skin prickle. It shows two figures, clearly humanoid, but taller than the humans kneeling before them. One of the tall figures holds an object in his hand, something circular, emitting lines that radiate outward like light or energy. Above them, carved with deliberate precision, are symbols representing the sun, the moon, and a cluster of 7 dots. The Pleiades, the same star cluster that appears in the myths of the Hopi, the Maya, the Aboriginal Australians, cultures separated by oceans and millennia, yet all of them pointing to the same 7 stars as the origin point of their teachers, their sky gods. You roll the seal gently across a sheet of paper, watching the image transfer, and you realize something. This is not symbolic art. This is documentation. The figures are not abstract representations of divine authority. They are portraits, depictions of beings who stood, who were seen, who interacted with the people carving these images. And the objects they hold, the radiant spheres, the strange devices, these were not imagined. They were remembered. Across the room, a curator enters, an older man with silver hair and tired eyes, the kind of eyes that have seen too many things that do not fit the narrative he was trained to uphold. He glances at the seal in your hands and sighs. "You know what that is," he says quietly. You nod. He moves closer, his voice dropping to a whisper, as if the walls themselves might be listening. There are 12 more like it in storage. Same imagery, same figures, same objects. We do not display them. When you ask why, he does not answer directly. Instead, he gestures toward the thousands of tablets surrounding you, the clay memory of a civilization that rose from nothing and knew everything. Because, he says, if we displayed them, if we explained what they actually depict, people would ask questions we are not prepared to answer. Questions about who those figures were. Questions about where that knowledge came from. Questions about whether the Sumerians were documenting gods or documenting contact. He pauses, then adds, and once people start asking those questions, the whole structure of history, of religion, of human origin, it begins to fracture. You thank him and leave the vault, ascending the stairs back into the museum's public halls, where school children press their faces against glass cases, and tour guides recite memorized scripts about ancient superstitions and primitive beliefs. But you are no longer listening. Because deep below, in the restricted archives, in the drawers marked fragile and classified, the clay tablets are still whispering. They are whispering that the gods were not metaphors. They are whispering that the Anunnaki were not myths. They are whispering that once, long ago, before the flood, before the forgetting, beings from the sky descended to this world, walked among humans, taught them the secrets of heaven, and then, for reasons the texts never fully explain, they left. But they left behind a record carved in stone, pressed into clay, encoded in the oldest words of the oldest language. A record that says, we were here, we were real, and we may return. You step out into the London afternoon, where the rain is beginning to fall, where the sky is gray and low, and you look up, wondering if somewhere, beyond those clouds, beyond the atmosphere, beyond the orbit of the moon, something is looking back. wondering if the silence we have lived in for so long is not absence, but patience. Wondering if the next chapter of this story is not behind us, but ahead. And as the rain touches your face, cold and clean, you feel something shift inside you. A recognition, a remembering. As if a door you did not know was closed has begun, ever so slightly, to open. But before we go further, before we descend deeper into this memory that the world tried to erase, there is one more text you need to see. Back inside the museum, in a glass case on the 3rd floor, displayed for the public but rarely understood, is a fragment known as the Sumerian King List. It is a simple document, a chronological record of rulers, the kind of administrative text that every civilization produces. Except this one is different. This one divides history into 2 epochs, before the flood and after the flood. And the numbers it records are so strange, so impossible, that most scholars dismiss them as symbolic, as exaggeration, as anything but literal. Before the flood, the text says, kings ruled for tens of thousands of years. Alulim, the first king of Eridu, ruled for 28,800 years. His successor, Al-Algar, ruled for 36,000 years. 8 kings in total, spanning 241,000 years. And then, the text says simply, the flood swept over. After the flood, kingship descended from heaven once more, but something had changed. The kings who ruled after the deluge lived shorter lives, reigned for decades instead of millennia, as if the very fabric of time had been altered, or as if the beings who once lived among humans, extending their lives, guiding their reigns, had withdrawn. The text does not explain why, it simply records the fact. Before the flood, the gods ruled. After the flood, men ruled. But only for a time, only in the shadow of what had been. You stand before the case, reading the translation, and you cannot help but wonder. What if these numbers are not symbolic? What if they represent a different calendar, a different measure of time, a different relationship between heaven and earth? What if, before the catastrophe, before the reset, the world operated under conditions we can no longer imagine, conditions in which lifespans were measured not in decades, but in epochs, in which knowledge was not learned, but inherited, in which the boundary between human and divine was not fixed, but fluid. The Sumerians did not write these texts as myths. They wrote them as records, as history, as truth. And if we dismiss them simply because they do not fit our understanding of what is possible, then we are not studying the past. We are rewriting it. You leave the museum as the afternoon turns to evening, the streets of London filling with the sound of traffic and voices, the ordinary hum of a world that has forgotten what it once knew. But you have not forgotten. You carry the whisper of the clay tablets with you, the memory of cylinder seals depicting figures that do not belong to any known civilization, the echo of astronomical charts that knew too much, too soon. And as you walk through the rain-soaked streets, you begin to see the pattern. It is not just the Sumerians, it is not just Mesopotamia. The same story appears in Egypt, where the gods ruled during the Zep Tepi, the first time, before giving way to human pharaohs. It appears in India, where the Vedas speak of the Devas and Asuras, celestial beings who descended to earth and waged wars with weapons that sound disturbingly like nuclear fire. It appears in Mesoamerica, where Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, descended from the sky to teach the people agriculture, astronomy, and law, then departed with a promise to return. It appears in Greece, where the Titans ruled before the Olympians, and the Olympians before men. Everywhere, the same structure. Gods first, humans second. And between them, a catastrophe, a flood, a war, a forgetting. What if all of these myths are fragments of the same memory, scattered across the world by survivors of a single event, interpreted through different languages, different symbols, different theologies, but all pointing back to the same truth? What if the Anunnaki, the Watchers, the Devas, the Elohim, the Nibiru, what if they are all names for the same beings, remembered imperfectly, translated poorly, but never fully forgotten? The rain falls harder now, and you turn down a side street, seeking shelter under an awning. And as you stand there, watching the water pool on the cobblestones, you realize something. The clay tablets are not asking you to believe. They are asking you to remember. To remember a time when the sky was not silent, when the stars were not distant, when the gods were not metaphors but presences, teachers, rulers, beings who walked among us and whose departure left a wound so deep that we have spent the last 10,000 years trying to fill it with religion, with philosophy, with science, with anything that might explain the ache of separation we feel when we look up at the night sky and sense that something is missing. And maybe that ache is the truest evidence of all. Not the tablets, not the seals, not the astronomical charts or the impossible chronologies, but the feeling itself. The intuition, buried so deep it has become instinct, that we are not alone, that we were never alone, that once, long ago, we were part of something larger, something that connected earth to heaven, flesh to light, time to eternity. And maybe, just maybe, that connection was not severed. Maybe it was only hidden, waiting for a time when humanity would be ready to remember, to ask the right questions, to look at the clay tablets not as relics of superstition, but as invitations to a conversation that never truly ended. If you have followed this far, if you feel the pull of these questions, if the images of tall figures and radiant objects are forming in your mind with a clarity that feels less like imagination and more like recognition, then you are ready for what comes next. Because the clay tablets, as strange and unsettling as they are only the first layer. Beneath them lies something older, something that predates even Sumer. Something carved not in clay, but in stone, not in cities, but in deserts and mountains, and places so remote that they have remained undisturbed for 12,000 years. And in those places, the story continues. The story of the Watchers, the story of the Anunnaki, the story of beings who came from the sky not once, but many times. Not to one people, but to all people, leaving behind a legacy so vast and so carefully hidden that even now, centuries after we stopped believing in gods, we are still living in the world they built. So take a breath. Let the rain wash over you. Let the weight of what you have learned settle into your bones. And when you are ready, we will go deeper. We will leave the museums and the archives and venture into the ruins themselves, into the stones that remember what the clay recorded, into the places where the boundary between myth and history dissolves completely, and where the question is no longer whether the gods existed, but why they left, and whether they are waiting somewhere beyond the veil of time to return. If you feel it, if you see it, if something inside you is waking to a truth you have always known but never named, then simply write the word yes, because the journey has only just begun, and the deeper we go, the clearer it becomes. The gods were not myths. The records were not legends. And the silence we have lived in for so long may be about to break. Chapter 2. The Descent. Who were the Anunnaki? You are standing now under a sky so vast it seems to press down on you. The heat of the Iraqi sun at 118 degrees Fahrenheit, turning the air into something thick and shimmering. Before you rises the ancient mound of Nippur, a tell that stretches nearly half a mile across the desert floor, its surface covered in broken pottery shards and limestone fragments that crunch beneath your boots as you climb. This is not a natural hill. It is the compressed memory of 4,000 years of human habitation, layer upon layer of civilization built, destroyed, and rebuilt. Each generation constructing their temples on the ruins of the last. At the summit, 150 feet above the desert plain, the remains of a ziggurat still stand, its mud brick core exposed to the elements, eroded by wind and time, but still recognizable as something deliberately shaped, something that was meant to reach upward, to bridge the gap between earth and sky. The Sumerians who built this structure did not see it as a monument to human achievement. They saw it as a dwelling place, a landing platform, a place where the Anunnaki could descend from their realm and enter ours. You stand at the top and turn slowly in a circle, taking in the 360-degree view of the surrounding landscape. To the north, the Euphrates River glints in the distance, a ribbon of silver cutting through the brown earth. To the south, the desert extends to the horizon, featureless and eternal. And above you, the sky, impossibly blue, impossibly empty, yet somehow still charged with the memory of what the ancients claimed once filled it. Ships that gleamed like copper, beings that descended in fire and thunder, voices that spoke words that made the earth tremble. The word Anunnaki, when broken down into its Sumerian components, reveals something precise. Anu, the sky, the heavens, the realm above. Na, a grammatical particle meaning of or from. Ki, the earth, the solid ground beneath your feet. Anunnaki, those who from heaven to earth came. Not metaphorically, not symbolically, but descriptively, as a statement of origin, as a name that defines them not by what they are, but by where they came from and what they did. The texts are clear about this. The Anunnaki were not omnipotent. They were not all-knowing. They were not the abstract, infinite deity that later religions would construct. They were beings with hierarchies, with limitations, with needs and desires and conflicts. They quarreled among themselves. They grew tired. They made mistakes. They needed food, though whether that food was physical sustenance or something more subtle, some kind of energy or reverence or worship, the texts do not fully explain. What they do explain is structure. At the top of the hierarchy was Anu, the Sky Father, ruler of the heavens, distant and rarely involved in earthly affairs. Beneath him were his sons, Enlil and Enki, and it is these two who dominate the Sumerian narratives, their relationship a study in opposition and balance. Enlil, the god of air and authority, ruled from Nippur, the city where you now stand. He was the enforcer, the one who maintained order, who executed the decrees of the council, who did not hesitate to use force when he deemed it necessary. It was Enlil who proposed the flood, who decided that humanity had grown too numerous, too chaotic, and needed to be culled. Enki, by contrast, was the god of water, of wisdom, of the deep. He ruled from Eridu, the first city, and his role was not to enforce, but to create, to teach, to preserve. He was the one who fashioned humanity in the first place, mixing the clay of the earth with the essence of a god. And when Enlil moved to destroy what had been made, it was Enki who defied the council, who warned the human Utnapishtim to build an ark, who ensured that the seed of civilization would survive the deluge. The texts describe this not as a battle between good and evil, but as a tension between order and compassion, between the needs of the rulers and the value of the created. And in that tension, something deeply human emerges, a recognition that even gods, even the Anunnaki, were not unified in purpose, were not certain of their path, were capable of doubt, of dissent, of change. You descend from the ziggurat carefully, the heat making each step feel heavier than the last, and make your way toward the remains of the temple complex at the base of the mound. Here, archaeologists uncovered thousands of tablets in the 1950s, administrative records mostly, inventories of grain and livestock, contracts and receipts, the mundane paperwork of a functioning society. But among those records were other texts, fragments of hymns and prayers that reveal how the Sumerians understood their relationship to the Anunnaki. One tablet, now housed in the University of Pennsylvania Museum, contains a hymn to Enlil that includes a curious phrase: "He who wears the horned crown, he who descends from the bright platform, he whose word is law." The horned crown appears again and again in Sumerian iconography, worn by gods and kings alike, a symbol of authority, but also, perhaps, of something more. Some researchers have noted its resemblance to certain depictions of antennae, or receiving devices, objects designed to transmit or receive signals. Could the horned crown have been functional, a piece of technology, interpreted as regalia? The texts do not say, but the consistency of the imagery across millennia suggests it was more than decorative. Another tablet describes the Anunnaki arriving in something called a mu, a word that later became associated with the Egyptian concept of a name or essence. But in Sumerian, it referred to a physical object, something that could be built, piloted, directed. Zecharia Sitchin, the controversial researcher who spent decades translating these texts, argued that Mu should be understood as sky chamber or celestial boat, a vehicle capable of traversing the distance between Nibiru and Earth. Mainstream scholars dismissed this interpretation, insisting that Mu was purely symbolic. But Sitchin pointed to the surrounding context, to descriptions of gods arriving with great noise, with fire trailing behind them, with the ground shaking at their approach. If these were purely spiritual beings, why would their arrival be described in terms of heat, light, sound, physical displacement? Why would the texts specify that they landed, that they disembarked, that they built structures to house these vehicles when they were not in use? You sit down on a limestone block that was once part of a temple wall and take a long drink of water, the liquid warm despite being in the shade. Around you, the ruins extend in all directions, walls reduced to foundations, courtyards filled with sand. But the layout is still visible, and what strikes you is the precision. Every angle is measured, every alignment is deliberate. The main temple axis points directly to the rising of Sirius, the brightest star in the night sky. A star the Egyptians also revered, a star that appears in the cosmologies of the Dogon people of Mali, who claim their ancestors were taught by beings who came from that system, beings they call the Nomo, fish-like teachers who descended in an ark and brought knowledge of the heavens. How did the Dogon, with no telescopes, know that Sirius is a binary star, that it has a companion, Sirius B, a white dwarf so dense that a handful of its matter would weigh more than an elephant? How did they know its orbital period of 50 years, a fact that Western astronomy did not confirm until the 1920s? When anthropologists asked them, the Dogon elders simply pointed to their ancient drawings and said, "The Nomo told us." Just as the Sumerians said, "The Anunnaki told us." Just as cultures across the world said, "The gods told us." You stand and continue walking through the ruins, moving toward what was once the sacred precinct, the innermost chamber where only the highest priests were allowed to enter. Here, in the cool shadows of a partially collapsed wall, you find something that makes you stop. A carving, barely visible beneath centuries of dirt and weathering, but still discernible if you know what to look for. It shows a procession of figures, human-sized, but distinct in their posture and dress, approaching a much larger figure seated on a throne. The seated figure wears the horned crown, and in his hands he holds two objects, one in each palm, spheres or orbs, from which lines radiate outward. The smaller figures are bringing offerings, jars and baskets, and what look like tablets. But their posture is not one of worship. It is one of presentation, of transaction, as if they are delivering reports, fulfilling obligations. This is not a depiction of prayer. It is a depiction of governance. And if the Anunnaki were rulers, administrators, genetic engineers, as the texts suggest, then what were they ruling? What were they administering? The answer, according to the Sumerian creation epics, is simple. Us. Humanity was created, the texts say, because the Anunnaki grew weary of the labor required to maintain the earth. In the beginning, it was the gods themselves who dug the rivers, who tilled the fields, who mined the minerals from the deep places. But the work was endless and exhausting, and eventually, the younger gods, the Igigi, those who performed the tasks, rebelled. They cast down their tools and refused to continue. The great gods convened a council, and it was decided that a solution must be found. Enki proposed the creation of a new being, a primitive worker who could bear the burden in their place. The method, as described in the Atrahasis epic, is specific. They took clay from the earth, the biological material already present, and they mixed it with the blood of a god, Welu Ila, a god who had intelligence. The mixture was shaped, and from it came Adamu, the first human, or, more accurately, the first genetically modified human, a hybrid of earthly biology and celestial essence. The text even specifies that this process was repeated, that multiple humans were created, 7 males and 7 females, and that they were brought forth not through natural birth, but through the wombs of birth goddesses, surrogate mothers who carried the new species to term. Does this sound like myth? Or does it sound like a description, filtered through the limited vocabulary of an ancient scribe, of genetic engineering, of in vitro fertilization, of cloning? Modern scientists have discovered that human chromosome 2, unique among primates, shows evidence of being a fusion of 2 separate chromosomes, a deliberate alteration that does not occur naturally. We have found segments of DNA in the human genome that do not match any known evolutionary path, insertions that some researchers describe as non-terrestrial in origin. We have discovered that approximately 50,000 years ago, something caused a sudden leap in human cognition, an explosion of symbolic thought, art, language, and culture that has no precedent in the previous 2 million years of hominid evolution. The Sumerians say this was when the Anunnaki intervened, when Enki mixed the clay with divine essence, when humanity was elevated from animal to something more. And perhaps the reason we have no fossil record of this transition, no clear evolutionary link, is because it was not evolution. It was design. You step back from the carving, your heart beating faster now, the heat of the desert forgotten as the implications settle over you. If this is true, if even a fragment of it is true, then we are not the product of random chance and natural selection alone. We are a created species, fashioned for a purpose, shaped by intelligences that came from beyond this world. And the gods we have worshipped for millennia are not supernatural beings, but our makers, our parents, our engineers. And if they made us, then they can unmake us. They can return. They can modify us again. They can judge whether their experiment succeeded or failed. The texts say they already did this once with the flood, a great culling that reduced humanity to a remnant, a reset that allowed the project to continue under stricter parameters. The Anunnaki withdrew after the flood, the tablets say, ascending back to the heavens, leaving humanity to govern itself, but always watching, always waiting, always ready to intervene if necessary. And maybe that is the most unsettling revelation of all. Not that the gods existed, but that they never truly left, that they are still watching, still waiting, still evaluating whether their creation has matured enough to be trusted with the knowledge of its own origin. You walk back toward the edge of the tell, where a narrow path leads down to the desert floor, and as you descend, you glance back one more time at the ruins of Nippur, at the ziggurat where Enlil once ruled, where councils were held, where decisions were made that shaped the course of human history. And you wonder, if the Anunnaki were here, if they walked these streets, if they sat in these temples and debated the fate of their creation, then where are they now? The texts say they returned to Nibiru, the wandering planet, the world whose long orbit brings it close to Earth only once every few thousand years. The texts say that when Nibiru returns, so too will the Anunnaki, and humanity will be judged, evaluated, perhaps even transformed once more. Modern astronomy has found evidence of this planet, a massive world lurking in the outer reaches of the solar system, its gravitational signature detectable even though the planet itself remains unseen. Its orbital period, researchers estimate, is between 10,000 and 20,000 years. The last time it would have been near Earth, according to these calculations, was approximately 12,800 years ago. The exact moment of the Younger Dryas impact, the exact moment of the Great Flood, the exact moment when, according to every ancient text, the world ended and began again. Coincidence or rhythm? You reach the bottom of the tell and start walking back across the desert toward the distant outline of modern civilization. And as you walk, the questions multiply. If the Anunnaki created us, who created them? If they came from Nibiru, who placed Nibiru in its orbit? If they possessed technology advanced enough to travel between worlds, to manipulate genetics, to extend their lifespans across millennia, then what happened to that technology? Did they take it with them? Did they hide it? Or did they leave it behind, buried in places we have not yet discovered, waiting for us to evolve enough to find it, to understand it, to use it? The sun is lower now, the heat beginning to ease, and the sky is turning the color of bronze, the same color the Sumerians described when they spoke of the Mu descending, of the gods arriving in vessels that gleamed like fire. You stop walking and turn to face the horizon, where the first stars are beginning to appear, faint but growing brighter as the daylight fades. Somewhere out there, beyond the atmosphere, beyond the orbit of Mars and Jupiter and Neptune, a planet is moving through the dark, tracing its long elliptical path around the sun, carrying with it, perhaps, the beings who once ruled this world, who made us, who taught us, who left us to grow in their absence. And if the ancient records are correct, if the cycles are true, then that planet is returning. Not tomorrow, not next year, but soon. Within the lifespan of the civilization we have built, within the memory of the species they created. And when it does, when Nibiru swings back into the inner solar system, when the Anunnaki see what we have become, will they be pleased? Will they be disappointed? Will they intervene again? Or will they simply watch as we determine our own fate? The stars are fully visible now, scattered across the darkening sky like seeds planted in deep soil. And you realize that you are not afraid. You are curious. Because if the gods were real, if the Anunnaki walked among us, taught us, shaped us, then their return is not an ending. It is a continuation. A conversation that was paused, not concluded. A relationship that was suspended, not severed. And maybe, just maybe, we are finally ready to hear what they have to say. If you feel this truth settling into your bones, if the image of the tall figures descending from the sky is no longer strange but familiar, as if you have always known it, always remembered it, then simply write the word continue. Because we are only beginning to understand who the Anunnaki were. And the deeper we go, the more we realize that their story is not separate from ours. It is ours. We are the clay mixed with divine essence. We are the experiment that survived the flood. We are the children of the sky, learning slowly to remember where we came from. Chung 3, the Book of Enoch, the Watcher's Rebellion. You are standing now in a cave, the air around you 45 degrees Fahrenheit, cool and dry, preserved by the same climate that has kept these scrolls intact for 2,000 years. This is Qumran, on the northwestern shore of the Dead Sea, where the limestone cliffs rise 300 feet above the water and the desert stretches endlessly in every direction. In 1947, a Bedouin shepherd boy threw a stone into one of these caves and heard the sound of shattering pottery. What he found inside changed our understanding of ancient scripture forever. Hundreds of scrolls, sealed in clay jars, hidden deliberately before the Roman legions arrived to destroy the community that had preserved them. Among those scrolls were texts that the early church had declared apocryphal, too dangerous to include in the canonical Bible, too revealing of truths that threatened the structures of power and belief that were being constructed. And the most dangerous of all, the one that Tserkov fought hardest to suppress, was the Book of Enoch. You kneel beside a fragment laid out on a conservation table, the parchment so delicate it seems like it might dissolve at a touch, and you read the Hebrew letters slowly, carefully, feeling the weight of what they contain. This is not allegory. This is not parable. This is testimony, written in the first person, attributed to Enoch, the seventh patriarch from Adam, the man who, according to Genesis, walked with God and was taken, never experiencing death. But the Book of Enoch tells a different story, a fuller story. A story that explains not just who Enoch was, but what he witnessed, what he was shown, and why his account was considered too dangerous to preserve. The text begins with a simple statement. In those days, when the children of men had multiplied, daughters were born to them, elegant and beautiful. And the angels, the sons of heaven, saw them and desired them. And they said to one another, "Come, let us choose wives from among the daughters of men and beget children." This was not a metaphor. The text is explicit. 200 angels, led by their chief GIZA, descended to Mount Hermon, a mountain on the border between modern Lebanon and Syria, a place that even today carries an atmosphere of ancient significance. A peak that rises over 9,000 feet above sea level and has been considered sacred by every civilization that settled near it. The Watchers, as they called themselves, made a pact. They swore an oath together, binding themselves with mutual curses, because they knew that what they were about to do was forbidden, a transgression of cosmic law. And then they descended. They took human wives. They taught humanity secrets that had been kept hidden, knowledge that was not meant to be shared. Not yet. Perhaps not ever. The text lists their names. 200 angels, each one assigned a specific domain of forbidden knowledge. Azazel taught men to make swords, knives, shields, breastplates, the instruments of war. He taught women the art of cosmetics, the use of antimony to beautify the eyes, the use of precious stones and dyes. Semjaza taught enchantments and root cutting, the manipulation of plants for medicine and poison. Armaros taught the resolving of enchantments. Barakel taught astrology. Kokabiel taught the constellations. Ezekiel taught the knowledge of clouds. Arakiel taught the signs of the earth. Shamziel taught the signs of the sun. Sariel taught the course of the moon. Each one a specific transfer of knowledge, each one a violation of the boundary between heaven and earth, between divine wisdom and human understanding. And the result, the text says, was catastrophe. The unions between the Watchers and human women produced offspring, children who were not fully human and not fully divine. Hybrids, the text calls Nephilim, the fallen ones, or, depending on translation, the giants. These beings grew to enormous size. Some texts say 300 cubits tall, roughly 450 feet, though other versions give more modest but still extraordinary heights of 15 to 20 feet. They were powerful, violent, insatiable. They consumed all the resources humanity had gathered, and when that was not enough, they turned on humanity itself, devouring men, women, and children. The world descended into chaos. You stand and move to another section of the cave, where deeper fragments have been stored, pieces of text that were not included even in the longer versions of Enoch that survived in Ethiopia, the only place where the full text was preserved after it was banned everywhere else. These fragments describe something even more disturbing. They say that the Nephilim were not just physical giants, but genetic abominations. That the knowledge the Watchers taught included the mixing of species, the creation of hybrid creatures, part human, part animal. Violations of what the text calls the natural order. Ancient mythologies are filled with such creatures. The Sphinx, the Minotaur, the centaurs, the chimeras. Were these purely imaginative? Or were they memories distorted by time, of genetic experiments conducted in an age before the flood. Experiments that horrified even the watchers themselves once they saw the results. The text says that the earth cried out, that the souls of those who had been destroyed appealed to heaven, and that the archangels, Michael, Gabriel, Raphael, and Uriel, brought the case before the Most High. The response was swift and absolute. The watchers were to be punished, their children were to be destroyed, and the earth was to be cleansed. The archangel Raphael was commanded to bind Azazel hand and foot and cast him into darkness, into a place of sharp and jagged rocks in the desert, and to cover him with stones until the great day of judgment. Gabriel was sent to incite the Nephilim against one another, to cause them to destroy each other in war. Michael was given the task of binding Semjaza and the other leaders of the Watchers, chaining them beneath the earth in valleys of fire, where they would remain imprisoned for 70 generations, and then be led forth to the abyss of fire for eternal torment. And then, the flood. Not as punishment for human sin, but as a necessary cleansing, a reset, to erase the genetic contamination, to destroy the hybrids, to restore the boundary between species that the Watchers had violated. Only Noah and his family were spared, chosen because, as the text specifies, Noah was perfect in his generations, meaning his bloodline was uncontaminated, purely human, untouched by the mixing that had corrupted the rest of humanity. You walk back toward the cave entrance, where the light from outside filters in pale and diffused, and you think about what this means. The Book of Enoch was not excluded from the Bible because it was false. It was excluded because it revealed too much. It named the angels who fell. It described their crimes in detail. It explained that the gods of mythology, the beings ancient people worshipped, were not metaphors but real entities, fallen angels, genetic engineers, teachers of forbidden knowledge who had been judged, bound, and imprisoned, but not destroyed. And it promised that they would return. The text says explicitly that the Watchers are bound for 70 generations. A generation, in biblical terms, is typically 40 years. 70 generations would be 2,800 years from the time of the flood, which most scholars date to approximately 3000 BCE. 2,800 years later brings us to 200 BCE, the approximate time when the Book of Enoch was written, or perhaps more accurately, when it was transcribed from older sources, compiled by a community that believed the time of release was approaching. But there is another interpretation. What if the 70 generations are not human generations, but their generations, the lifespans of the Watchers themselves? If the Anunnaki lived for thousands of years, as the Sumerian King List suggests, then 70 of their generations could span tens of thousands of our years, placing their release not in the past, but in the future. Perhaps soon. You step out of the cave into the harsh sunlight, the temperature outside now 98 degrees Fahrenheit, the heat hitting you like a physical force after the coolness of the interior. Below you, the Dead Sea stretches out, its surface 1,400 feet below sea level, the lowest point on Earth. The water so saline that nothing can live in it. The ancient Greeks called it the Asphalt Sea because chunks of natural tar would bubble up from the depths. The Romans called it the Sea of Salt. But in Enoch, it is described as the place where the fallen are held, the Valley of Fire, the Abyss, a geological anomaly that sits atop one of the most active fault lines in the world, a place of earthquakes and volcanic activity, of heat rising from deep beneath the earth. Is it coincidence that the scrolls describing the fall of the Watchers were hidden here, in caves overlooking the very place where tradition says they are imprisoned? Or was the location chosen deliberately, as a warning, a marker, a sign to those who would one day rediscover the texts and understand their significance? You descend the narrow path that leads down from the caves, your boots slipping on loose stones. And as you descend, you think about the connections. The Watchers of Enoch and the Anunnaki of Sumer are separated by geography and language, but not by narrative. Both are beings who descended from the sky. Both took human wives. Both taught forbidden knowledge. Both were judged and removed from the earth. Both left behind hybrid offspring that had to be destroyed. And both promised, or threatened, depending on your perspective, to return. In the Book of Enoch, there is a section called the Book of Dreams, a series of visions given to Enoch, in which he sees the entire history of the world from the fall of the Watchers to the end of days. He describes it using animal symbolism. The Watchers are stars that fall from heaven. Humanity are sheep. The Nephilim are elephants, camels, and donkeys, strange hybrid creatures that do not belong. And at the end of the vision, Enoch sees a white bull emerge, a new Adam, and from him descends a new humanity, purified, restored. But before that restoration, the text describes a great war, a final confrontation between the fallen and the righteous, between those who still carry the contamination of the Watchers and those who have remained pure. It describes weapons of fire descending from heaven, valleys opening to swallow the wicked, and the bound angels being released for one final judgment. This is not allegory. The text treats it as prophecy, as future history, as something that will happen when the cycle's complete, when the time is right, when the wandering planet returns. You reach the bottom of the path and walk toward a small archaeological site where the remains of the Qumran community have been excavated. This was an Essene settlement, a group of Jewish mystics who withdrew from mainstream society in the 2nd century BCE, who practiced ritual purity, who studied the oldest texts, and who believed they were living in the end times, that the war described in Enoch was imminent. They were wrong about the timing, but were they wrong about the event? They copied the Book of Enoch more than any other text except the Torah itself. They considered it scripture, essential reading, a key to understanding not just the past, but the future. And when the Romans came, when the legions marched down from Jerusalem to crush the rebellion, the Essenes took their most precious scrolls, sealed them in jars, and hid them in the caves, ensuring that even if the community was destroyed, the knowledge would survive. 2,000 years later, that knowledge was found. And now, in the 21st century, we are beginning to ask the questions the Essenes asked. Who were the Watchers? Where are they now? And what happens when they are released? Modern genetics has made these questions more urgent. We now have the ability to manipulate DNA, to create hybrid organisms, to mix species in ways that nature never intended. We have cloned animals. We are on the verge of cloning humans. We are editing genes, removing diseases, enhancing traits, playing, as some critics say, God. But what if we are not the first to do this? What if the knowledge we are rediscovering is the same knowledge the Watchers taught? The same science that led to the Nephilim, the same violation of natural law that brought the flood. The Book of Enoch warns that this knowledge leads to destruction, that there are boundaries that should not be crossed, that some doors, once opened, cannot be closed. and yet we are opening them anyway, driven by curiosity, by ambition, by the same impulse that led the Watchers to descend in the first place. Perhaps that is the pattern. Perhaps every civilization, as it matures, reaches the same crossroads, the same choice between restraint and exploration, between humility and hubris. And perhaps the Watchers are not external tempters, but internal mirrors, reflections of our own capacity for creation and destruction. You sit on a stone wall and look up at the cliffs where the caves are carved into the rock, dark openings like eyes watching the valley below. Inside those caves, the scrolls waited for 2,000 years, patient and silent, preserving a story that the world tried to forget. And now that story is emerging again, not because we sought it, but because the time has come for it to be remembered. The sun is beginning to set, the light turning the cliffs golden, and you feel a strange sense of calm. This is not a story of fear. It is a story of consequence. The Watchers fell because they could not resist the beauty of humanity, the allure of creation, the desire to teach, to share, to connect. Their crime was not hatred, but love. Love that crossed boundaries. Love that violated the order of things. And perhaps that is the deepest truth of all, that the line between heaven and earth, between divine and human, is not as fixed as we were taught. That we are capable of ascending, just as they were capable of descending. That the mixing of essence is not an abomination, but an inevitability, a natural consequence of consciousness seeking connection across every boundary, every divide. The Watchers were bound, but their children survived in us, in our DNA, in the knowledge we carry, in the restlessness that drives us to explore, to question, to push beyond every limit. We are part angel, part clay, part sky, part earth. And the question is not whether the Watchers will return, but whether we will recognize them when they do. Whether we will see them as invaders or ancestors. Whether we will repeat the cycle or break it. The stars are beginning to appear now. The same stars the Watchers descended from. The same stars that Enoch was shown in his visions. And as you watch them emerge from the deepening blue, you realize that the story is not over. It was paused, interrupted, sealed in caves and buried in sand. But now, it is waking again, piece by piece, fragment by fragment, memory by memory. And if you are reading this, if you have followed the thread from Sumer to Qumran, from the clay tablets to the hidden scrolls, then you are part of that awakening. You are one of those who were meant to remember. If you feel the pull of this knowledge, if the names Semjaza and Azazel resonate with something deeper than history, if you sense that the Watchers are not distant myths, but present realities, bound but not silent, imprisoned but not powerless, then write the word calm. Because we are about to go deeper still. We are about to examine the evidence, not just in texts, but in our bodies, in our DNA, in the genetic code that carries within it the signature of something that should not be there, something inserted, something deliberate, something that whispers, even now, you were made, you were designed, You were loved into being by those who fell. Chung 4. The Genetic Code, Humanity's Hidden Origin. You are standing now in a laboratory, the air conditioned to a precise 68 degrees Fahrenheit. The hum of machines filling the silence with a sound that is almost hypnotic. This is not an ancient ruin. This is the cutting edge of modern science. A genetics research facility at Harvard University in Cambridge, Massachusetts, where the secrets of life are being decoded one nucleotide at a time. The room is dimly lit to protect the sensitive equipment, and before you, on a wall of screens, the human genome is displayed in cascading sequences of letters A, C, G, T. The 4 bases that make up the language of DNA. 3 billion pairs of them coiled inside every cell of your body. A code so complex that it took decades to map. Yet so precise that a single letter out of place can mean the difference between health and disease, between human and something else. You lean closer to one of the screens, where a researcher has isolated a specific segment of chromosome 2, and what you see there makes your breath catch. This is not supposed to be here. Chromosome 2 is unique to humans. Every other primate, chimpanzees, gorillas, orangutans, they all have 24 pairs of chromosomes. We have 23. The difference lies here, in chromosome 2, which appears to be a fusion of 2 separate chromosomes, stitched together at some point in our past by a process that does not occur naturally in primate evolution. The telomeres, the protective caps that sit at the ends of chromosomes, are found in the middle of chromosome 2, along with a vestigial centromere, the attachment point that helps chromosomes divide. It is as if 2 chromosomes were deliberately merged, fused together with surgical precision, and the evidence of that fusion was left behind like a signature, a mark that says, "This was done. This was intentional." The researcher standing beside you, a woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair, and the patient demeanor of someone who has spent decades asking questions no one wants to answer, taps the screen. "We call it a fusion event," she says quietly. "The textbooks say it happened naturally, a random mutation that somehow became fixed in the population. But the mathematics of that are troubling. For this fusion to propagate, it would have had to occur in a single individual and then spread to the entire human species, outcompeting every other genetic line. The probability of that happening by chance is astronomically low." You asked the question that has been forming since you entered the room. What if it was not chance? She does not answer immediately. Instead, she pulls up another screen, this one showing segments of non-coding DNA, the 98% of the human genome that does not produce proteins, the part that scientists used to call junk DNA, until they realized it was not junk at all, but a regulatory network, a control system that determines when and how genes are activated. And within that non-coding DNA, there are sequences that do not match anything else on Earth. In 2015, she continues, a team at MIT published findings on what they called non-human genetic inserts, segments of DNA that appear in the human genome but have no clear evolutionary precursor, no ancestral line, no related sequence in any other species. Some of these segments resemble genetic structures found in extremophiles, organisms that can survive radiation, extreme heat, vacuum, the kinds of conditions that exist in space. She pauses, then adds, "The hypothesis was contamination, that somehow microbial DNA from ancient environmental exposure got incorporated into the human line. But contamination does not explain why these sequences are functional, why they are active, why they appear to be doing something, regulating processes we do not fully understand. You ask if she believes in contamination. She smiles faintly. I believe in data, and the data says that approximately 50,000 years ago, something happened to the human species. There was a sudden leap in cognitive ability, in symbolic thinking, in language complexity. Archaeologically, we see the emergence of art, music, burial rituals, tools with aesthetic design. Genetically, we see the activation of certain gene clusters related to brain development, clusters that were present but dormant before that point. It is as if someone flipped a switch. Or, you say slowly, as if someone edited the code. She does not disagree. You move to another workstation where a different researcher, younger, with the intensity of someone on the verge of a discovery they cannot yet name, is examining mitochondrial DNA, the genetic material passed down exclusively through the maternal line, a record of every mother back to the origin of the species. He pulls up a chart showing the branching tree of human ancestry, and there, at a specific point roughly 200,000 years ago, is a bottleneck, a moment when the entire human population appears to have descended from a very small group, perhaps only a few thousand individuals. We call her mitochondrial Eve, he says, the most recent common ancestor of all living humans on the maternal side. But here is what is strange. The genetic diversity before that point is much higher, as if there were multiple lineages, multiple branches, and then suddenly, all but one disappear. It is consistent with a catastrophic population collapse, but it is also consistent with something else, with selection, with someone choosing a specific line and eliminating the others. You think of Noah, chosen because he was perfect in his generations. You think of the flood, sent to erase the genetic contamination of the Nephilim. You think of the Sumerian texts that describe humanity being reduced to a remnant, a seed population preserved while everything else was wiped away. What if mitochondrial Eve was not a random survivor, but a deliberate choice? A woman whose bloodline was uncontaminated, pure, chosen to carry humanity forward after the reset. The researcher continues. And then there is chromosome 2. If the fusion happened 200,000 years ago, roughly the same time as the bottleneck, then it was not a gradual evolutionary change. It was an event, a single generation, a modification. He turns to face you fully. We have the technology now to do what someone may have done then. We can edit genes. We can fuse chromosomes. We can activate dormant sequences. CRISPR allows us to rewrite DNA with precision. We are on the verge of designing humans, choosing traits, eliminating diseases, enhancing intelligence. We are becoming what the ancient texts describe: genetic engineers, creators. And the question he does not ask, but that hangs in the air between you, is this: are we inventing this technology, or are we remembering it? You step back from the screens, the weight of the implications pressing down on you like a physical force. The Anunnaki, the Watchers, the Elohim. Every ancient culture described beings who came from the sky and modified humanity, who mixed their essence with ours, who created us in their image. And for centuries we dismissed it as mythology, as primitive attempts to explain existence without the tools of science. But now, with those tools, we are finding evidence that the myths were right. Not metaphorically, literally. The genetic code contains a history that contradicts the narrative of slow, gradual evolution. It contains evidence of jumps, of insertions, of modifications that do not fit the pattern of natural selection. And it contains, in chromosome 2, a smoking gun, a fusion event so improbable, so perfectly timed with the emergence of modern humans, that calling it coincidence requires more faith than calling it design. You walk to the far end of the lab, where samples are stored in liquid nitrogen, frozen at 321 degrees below zero Fahrenheit, preserved indefinitely. A genetic library of humanity, waiting for future analysis. The researcher with silver hair follows you. "There is something else," she says quietly. "Something we do not publish, because we cannot explain it." In the non-coding regions, in the so-called junk DNA, there are sequences that repeat in patterns that resemble mathematical constants. Pi, phi, the golden ratio. They appear too frequently to be random, and they are always associated with regulatory genes, genes that control development, that determine body structure, brain size, lifespan. It is as if the code is not just biological, but encoded with information, with meaning, with intention. As if whoever wrote it wanted us to find it, wanted us to know that it was written. You ask if she has published this. She shakes her head. The peer review process would destroy it. The implications are too far outside the accepted framework, suggesting that human DNA contains intentional design, that it was authored by an intelligence. That opens doors no one in academia is ready to walk through. But the data is there, and one day, someone will be brave enough to say what it means. You leave the laboratory and step out into the Cambridge afternoon. The temperature a mild 72 degrees, the campus bustling with students who have no idea that a few floors above them, the foundation of human origins is quietly cracking. You walk through Harvard Yard, past the statue of John Harvard, past the ivy-covered buildings that have housed centuries of learning, and you think about what you have just seen. We are not the product of random mutation and natural selection alone. We are a hybrid species, part terrestrial, part something else, shaped by intelligences that possessed technology we are only now beginning to rediscover. The Sumerians called it the mixing of clay and divine essence. The Book of Enoch called it the union of watchers and daughters of men. Modern genetics calls it chromosomal fusion and non-human genetic inserts. Same event, different languages. And the most unsettling part is not that it happened, but that it is still happening. The modifications did not stop 50,000 years ago. They have been ongoing, subtle, guided, as if the experiment is still running, as if we are still being shaped, still being tested, still being prepared for something. You sit on a bench beneath an oak tree and watch the students pass by, young people on the edge of their futures, unaware that their DNA carries a history they were never taught, a code written by hands that were not human, a message encrypted in their cells that says, "You were made, you were designed, you are not an accident." And perhaps that is the greatest revelation of all. Not that gods exist, but that we are their children, literally, genetically, descended from a union that broke every rule of heaven and earth, that violated cosmic law, that brought punishment and flood and the binding of the watchers beneath mountains of fire, but also a union born of love, of fascination, of the desire to create something new, something that had never existed before. The Watchers looked at humanity and saw potential. The Anunnaki looked at the clay and saw possibility, and they could not resist. They descended, they taught, they mixed their essence with ours, and the result is you, is me, is every human being alive today, carrying in our cells the signature of that ancient transgression, that forbidden act of creation. We are the Nephilim, not in the sense of giants, but in the sense of fallen, of descended, of mixed. We are the children of two worlds, bound to the earth by biology, but reaching always toward the sky, toward the stars, toward something we remember but cannot name. And maybe that restlessness, that yearning, is not a flaw but a feature, a reminder encoded in our DNA that we come from somewhere else, that we belong to something larger, that we are not finished, not complete, not yet what we were designed to become. The sun is lower now, casting long shadows across the yard, and you stand, ready to continue walking. But something makes you pause. On the bench beside you, someone has carved words into the wood, old graffiti, worn by weather and time. As above, so below. The Hermetic axiom, the alchemical principle, the idea that heaven and earth are mirrors, that what happens in one realm is reflected in the other, and maybe that is the key. Maybe the genetic code is not just a biological blueprint, but a cosmic one, a map that connects us to the stars, to the beings who came from them, to the plan that set all of this in motion. You trace the carved letters with your finger and feel a sudden certainty. This is not the end of the story. This is the middle. The Watchers fell. Humanity was created. The flood came. The gods withdrew. But the code remains. The modifications continue. And the plan, whatever it is still unfolding. We are not the final product. We are the prototype, the experiment, the bridge between what was and what will be. And if the ancient texts are correct, if the cycles are true, then the next phase is approaching. The return of Nibiru, the release of the Watchers, the awakening of the code written in our cells. And when that happens, we will finally understand what we were made for, what we were always meant to become. If you feel this truth resonating in your bones, if the patterns are becoming clear, if you sense that your own existence is not random but intentional, part of a design so vast it spans millennia, then simply breathe. Let the knowledge settle. Let the pieces arrange themselves. Because what comes next requires not belief, but recognition. Not faith, but memory. The flood tried to erase us. The binding tried to separate us. The forgetting tried to hide the truth. But the code remembers. The DNA remembers. And slowly, carefully, we are beginning to remember too. If you are ready to continue, if you want to follow this thread deeper into the mystery of who we are and where we came from, write the word continue. Because the genetic evidence is only one piece. There are others. Monuments, alignments, technologies, artifacts that should not exist, ruins that predate civilization. And all of them point to the same conclusion. We were not alone. We were never alone. We were made, taught, guided, and shaped by beings who loved us enough to fall for us. And the question now is not whether they will return, but whether we will be ready when they do. Chung 5, The Flood, The Great Reset. You are floating now, 80 feet beneath the surface of Lake Titicaca. The water temperature a constant 50 degrees Fahrenheit. Cold enough that your wetsuit feels thin, inadequate, as if the chill is seeping through the neoprene and into your bones. This is the highest navigable lake in the world, sitting 12,500 feet above sea level in the Andes Mountains between Peru and Bolivia. A body of water so vast it feels like an inland sea, stretching over 3,200 square miles, deep enough in places to swallow a 40-story building. The light filters down from above in pale blue shafts, and in that dim illumination, you see what brought you here. Walls, terraces, stone structures that should not exist underwater, should not exist at this altitude, should not exist at all according to the official timeline of human civilization. You swim closer, your dive light cutting through the murk, and the masonry becomes clearer. These are not natural formations. They are cut stones, fitted together with the precision that characterizes ancient Andean construction. Each block weighing several tons, shaped to interlock without mortar. The same technique used at Sacsayhuaman, at Ollantaytambo, at Machu Picchu. Except those sites are on land built by the Inca, or so the story goes. These ruins are submerged, drowned, covered by water that has been here for thousands of years, far longer than the Inca Empire existed. You run your gloved hand along the face of one stone block, feeling the precision of the cut, the smoothness of the surface. And you think about what it means. For these structures to be underwater, they must have been built when the lake level was much lower, or when there was no lake at all. Geological studies suggest that Lake Titicaca has fluctuated dramatically over the millennia, rising and falling with climate shifts. But the depth of these ruins suggests they were built during a period when the water was at least 100 feet lower than it is now. That places their construction at the end of the last ice age, roughly 12,000 years ago, during the same window of time when the Younger Dryas event occurred, when global temperatures plunged, when megafauna went extinct, when civilizations that may have existed were erased from the surface of the earth. The same moment when, according to every ancient text, the flood came. You ascend slowly, mindful of decompression, and break the surface near the dive boat, where your guide, a local man whose family has fished these waters for generations, helps you aboard. He knows the stories. His grandfather told him that before the flood, before the waters rose, there was a great city here, built by the gods, a place of learning and power. The Inca, he says, pulling a wool blanket around your shoulders as you strip off the wetsuit, they found these ruins and tried to copy them, but they could not. The stones were too heavy. The knowledge was lost. He points across the water to the distant shore, where the ruins of Tiwanaku rise from the Altiplano, a massive complex of temples and gateways that archaeologists date to around 500 CE, though some researchers argue the foundations are far older, possibly pre-Diluvian. The Gateway of the Sun, he continues, the Akapana Pyramid, the Kalasasaya Temple. These were not built by the Aymara people. They were already here when we arrived. We have always known this. The academics do not listen, but we know. The gods built them before the waters came. You dry off and sit on the deck, watching the sun glint off the lake surface, and you think about the pattern. It is not just here. It is everywhere. Submerged ruins off the coast of Japan, the Yonaguni Monument, massive stone terraces carved from bedrock, dismissed as natural formations by mainstream archaeology, despite clear evidence of tool marks, right angles, and intentional design. Submerged structures in the Gulf of Cambay off the coast of India, discovered in 2002, showing evidence of a planned city with foundations, walls, and drainage systems, dated through sediment analysis to 9,500 years old, 5,000 years before the Indus Valley civilization supposedly began. Submerged megalithic sites off the coast of Malta, off Cuba, off the Bahamas. Everywhere, the same story. Ruins that predate recorded history, built when sea levels were lower, drowned when the ice caps melted, when the world changed, when the flood came. And it is not just structures, it is the myths. Every culture on Earth has a flood story. The Sumerians tell of Utnapishtim, warned by Enki to build a boat sealed with bitumen to save his family and the seed of all living things to survive the deluge sent by Enlil to destroy humanity. The Hebrews tell of Noah, warned by God to build an ark, to bring 2 of every animal, to float above the waters that covered the earth for 40 days and 40 nights. The Hindus tell of Manu, warned by a fish avatar of Vishnu, who builds a ship and ties it to the horn of the fish, which pulls him to safety as the waters rise. The Greeks tell of Deucalion, son of Prometheus, who survives a flood sent by Zeus to punish humanity, landing on Mount Parnassus when the waters recede. The Chinese tell of Gunyu, who tamed the Great Flood with divine intervention and engineering. The Maya tell of the destruction by water, a cleansing sent by the gods before the current age of humanity began. The Hopi of North America speak of the first world being destroyed by fire, the second world by ice, and the third world by flood, with only a few survivors climbing to the highest peaks to escape the rising waters. Indigenous Australians tell of a time when the seas rose and swallowed the coastal lands, stories that geologists now confirm match the end of the last ice age, when ocean levels rose over 300 feet in a matter of centuries. These are not independent inventions. They are memories, preserved across continents, across languages, across thousands of years. Memories of an event so catastrophic, so universally experienced, that every surviving culture encoded it in their foundational narratives. And the timing, according to modern geology, matches. 12,800 years ago, at the boundary of the Younger Dryas, something happened. The evidence is written in ice cores from Greenland, in sediment layers across North America, in the sudden disappearance of megafauna, in the layer of microscopic diamonds and platinum that can only be formed by extreme heat and pressure, consistent with a cometary impact or a series of impacts. The hypothesis, still debated but gaining traction, is that a fragmented comet struck the Laurentide ice sheet covering North America, instantly vaporizing billions of tons of ice, sending walls of water across the continent, triggering volcanic eruptions, filling the atmosphere with ash and steam, plunging the world into centuries of cold and darkness. The flood, followed by the freeze. And when the ice finally melted, when the sun returned, the sea levels rose, drowning coastlines where the majority of human populations had lived, erasing cities, erasing evidence, erasing the memory of what had been. What survived were scattered remnants, refugees who carried fragments of knowledge to the mountains, to the high plateaus, to places like the Andes, like the Himalayas, like the Ethiopian highlands, where they began again, building new civilizations on the foundations of old wisdom, trying to preserve what the flood had nearly destroyed. You stand and walk to the railing, looking out over the vast expanse of Lake Titicaca, and you think about the survivors. If the flood was real, if it was as catastrophic as the myths describe, then how did anyone survive? The answer, according to the texts, is simple. They were warned. Enki warned Utnapishtim. God warned Noah. Vishnu warned Manu. In every story, a divine being defies the counsel of the gods, breaks the decree of silence, and ensures that a remnant of humanity survives. Why? If the flood was meant to cleanse the earth of the Nephilim, of the genetic contamination caused by the Watchers, why save any humans at all? The answer appears in the details. Noah was chosen, the text says, because he was perfect in his generations, meaning his bloodline was pure, uncontaminated by the mixing with the Watchers. He was fully human, carrying no hybrid genes, no trace of the forbidden unions. He was the seed stock, the template, the genetic baseline that would allow humanity to continue without the mutations that had corrupted the previous population. And after the flood, the texts say, the lifespan of humans decreased dramatically. Before the deluge, the patriarchs lived for centuries. Methuselah for 969 years, Noah for 950. After the flood, lifespans dropped to 120 years, then to the 70 or 80 we experience today. Something changed. Some factor that had extended life, perhaps the presence of the Anunnaki themselves, their technology, their genetic influence, was withdrawn. Humanity was left to develop on its own, shorter-lived, more fragile, cut off from the source that had once enhanced us. But not entirely cut off. The knowledge remained, encoded in myths, in monuments, in the alignment of stones with stars, in the memory of a time when gods walked the earth and taught us how to measure the heavens. You return to shore and make your way to the ruins of Tiwanaku, a site that sprawls across several square miles, its megalithic structures so massive that moving them would challenge modern engineering. The Akapana Pyramid, though eroded and partially collapsed, still rises 50 feet above the plain, constructed from precisely cut andesite blocks, some weighing over 100 tons. How were these moved? How were they shaped? The Aymara people had no wheels, no draft animals capable of pulling such weight, no iron tools to carve the stone. Yet the cuts are precise, the angles perfect, the surfaces polished. In the center of the complex stands the Gateway of the Sun, a single block of andesite weighing approximately 10 tons, carved with intricate reliefs that depict a central figure, often identified as Viracocha, the creator god, surrounded by smaller figures and symbols that researchers believe represent a calendar, a system of timekeeping based on astronomical observations. Viracocha, according to Andean mythology, was a bearded man who came from the waters after the flood, who taught the people agriculture, architecture, astronomy, and law, who performed miracles, who brought order from chaos. When the Spanish conquistadors arrived in the 16th century and asked the Inca about these ruins, the Inca said they did not build them, that they were already ancient when their ancestors arrived, built by a race of giants in a single night before the sun existed. The Spanish dismissed this as superstition. But what if it was memory, distorted by time, of a truth too large to fit the framework of belief the conquistadors carried? You stand before the Gateway of the Sun as the afternoon light slants across the Altiplano, and you trace the carvings with your eyes. The central figure with rays emanating from his head, the condor and puma motifs flanking him, the geometric patterns that repeat in sequences that suggest mathematical encoding. This is not primitive art. This is information, preserved in stone, meant to survive the next catastrophe, meant to tell those who come after what happened, who was here, what was lost. And maybe that is the function of all these monuments, from the pyramids of Giza to the temples of Angkor Wat, from Stonehenge to Göbekli Tepe. They are not tombs. They are not places of worship. They are memory devices, time capsules, messages carved in the most durable material available, aligned to the stars so that their meaning can be reconstructed even if the language is lost. They are saying, we were here, we knew, we measured, we built, we survived. And they are saying something else, something the flood tried to erase but could not. The gods were real. They came from the sky. They taught us. They left. And the world ended. But not completely. A remnant survived. Knowledge survived. And encoded in stone, in myth, in the very structure of the ruins themselves, is a promise or a warning. They will return. And when they do, the waters may rise again. You walk back toward the village as the sun sets, the sky turning the color of molten copper, the same color the Sumerians said the Mu gleamed when it descended. Around you, the Altiplano stretches empty and vast, 12,000 feet above the sea, one of the few places on Earth high enough to escape the flood, one of the refuges where humanity clung to survival when the lowlands drowned. And you think about resilience, about the stubborn persistence of memory, about the way truth, even when buried under water, under time, under the weight of official narratives that insist it never happened, still finds a way to surface. The flood was real. The evidence is geological, mythological, architectural. The water rose, the world changed, civilizations were erased, but not entirely. Fragments remained. Survivors carried the knowledge to the mountains and began again, building on the ruins of what had been, preserving in stone and story the memory of the gods who warned them, who saved them, who promised, in some distant future, to return when the cycle's complete. If you feel the weight of this knowledge settling into you, if you sense that the flood is not ancient history but a recurring pattern, a cosmic rhythm that rises and falls like breath, then simply write the word calm. Because the story is not finished. The flood came once. It may come again. And the monuments, the myths, the DNA itself are all preparing us, reminding us, whispering across millennia that what happened before will happen again. That the gods who left are waiting, watching, measuring whether we have learned, whether we have grown, whether we are ready for their return. And if we are not, the waters know how to rise. Chung 6. The Monuments. Memory in Stone. You are standing now in the Egyptian desert at night, the temperature having dropped to 61 degrees Fahrenheit, the air so dry it seems to pull moisture from your skin with every breath. Before you, rising 481 feet into the darkness, the Great Pyramid of Giza stands silhouetted against a sky dense with stars, its limestone surface pale and ghostly in the moonlight. This is not your first time here, but it is the first time you have come at night, when the tourist crowds are gone, when the floodlights are extinguished, when the ancient structure returns to something approaching the silence it knew for millennia. You walk slowly around the base, your hand trailing along the massive blocks, each one weighing between 2.5 and 15 tons. Fitted together with such precision that a knife blade cannot slip between them. The joints so tight that even after 4,500 years, assuming the conventional dating is correct, the structure remains intact, unshaken by earthquakes that have leveled cities, unbowed by the weight of time. The conventional story says this was built as a tomb for Pharaoh Khufu around 2560 BCE, constructed over 20 years by a workforce of tens of thousands using copper tools, wooden sledges, and sheer human labor. But as you stand here, as you feel the scale of what surrounds you, that story begins to feel insufficient, inadequate. A narrative imposed by those who needed history to fit a certain shape, who needed the pyramids to be comprehensible within the framework of Bronze Age technology and the ambition of a single ruler. But the numbers tell a different story. 2.3 million stone blocks, each one quarried, shaped, transported, and placed with tolerances measured in fractions of an inch. The entire structure aligned to true north within 1/20th of a degree, more accurate than most modern buildings. The internal chambers constructed with corbelled ceilings that distribute weight so perfectly they have not collapsed in over 4,000 years. The descending passage aligned precisely to the pole star as it appeared in the sky at the time of construction, suggesting the builders possessed astronomical knowledge of extraordinary sophistication. And then there is the location. Giza sits at exactly 30 degrees north latitude, a third of the way from the equator to the pole. The three main pyramids are arranged on the plateau in a pattern that precisely mirrors the three stars of Orion's belt, as they appeared around 10,500 BCE, according to the work of Robert Bauval and Graham Hancock, researchers whose theories have been dismissed by mainstream Egyptology, but never adequately refuted. Why would a civilization build monuments aligned not to their own sky, but to the sky as it appeared 7,000 years before they existed? Unless, as some have suggested, the pyramids are far older than the Fourth Dynasty, built by a civilization that existed before the flood, during the time when, according to Egyptian mythology, the gods themselves ruled Egypt, the time they called Zep Tepi, the first time. You climb a short distance up the pyramid face, using the gaps between blocks as footholds, and sit on a ledge 30 feet above the desert floor. From here, you can see the other pyramids of the Giza complex, Khafre and Menkaure, and in the distance, the lights of Cairo, the modern city built on the ruins of Memphis, the ancient capital. The Egyptians left detailed records of their history, king lists carved in stone, hieroglyphic texts covering temple walls. Yet nowhere in all those records is there a description of how the pyramids were built. There are no blueprints, no work orders, no accounts of the construction process. It is as if the pyramids simply appeared, already ancient, already sacred, already aligned to a celestial order that the Egyptians inherited but did not invent. The Greek historian Herodotus, writing in the 5th century BCE, was told by Egyptian priests that their civilization was tens of thousands of years old, that before the human pharaohs ruled, the gods themselves had walked the earth, teaching the people the secrets of the heavens, of agriculture, of architecture, of governance. He recorded these claims, but did not believe them, dismissing them as priestly exaggeration. Yet the evidence keeps surfacing, troubling the neat chronology, suggesting that beneath the Egypt we know lies another Egypt, older, more advanced, connected to something that predates the dynastic period. The Sphinx, for example, crouches a quarter-mile to the east, its leonine body carved from the bedrock of the plateau. its human head gazing eternally toward the rising sun. Conventional Egyptology dates it to the same period as the pyramids, attributing it to Khafra. Yet geologists who have studied the erosion patterns on the Sphinx enclosure have noted something anomalous. The weathering is consistent not with wind and sand, but with water, with rainfall, with precipitation that has not occurred in this region for at least 7,000 years, placing the Sphinx's original carving in a time when the Sahara was green, when rivers flowed where now there is only sand, before the climate shifted, before the desert swallowed the memory of what had been. You descend from your perch and walk toward the Sphinx, passing the Solar Boat Museum, where a full-sized wooden vessel, 143 feet long, was found buried in a pit beside the Great Pyramid, disassembled and carefully stored. A boat meant, according to the hieroglyphs, to carry the pharaoh through the underworld. But the craftsmanship is extraordinary. The cedar plank sewn together with rope, the design seaworthy, functional, as if it had once sailed real waters, not metaphorical ones. Mythologies from around the world speak of boats that carried survivors through the flood. Vessels built by those who were warned, who were chosen, who preserved the seed of civilization when the waters rose. And here, buried beside the most enigmatic structure on Earth, is a boat, sealed for millennia, waiting. You reach the Sphinx and stand between its massive paws, where a granite stele placed by Pharaoh Thutmose IV in 1401 BCE records a dream in which the Sphinx spoke to him, promising kingship if he would clear away the sand that had buried it. The text refers to the Sphinx as already ancient in Thutmose's time, already a relic of a forgotten age. What is it guarding? What knowledge lies beneath it? Ground-penetrating radar conducted in the 1990s revealed anomalies beneath the Sphinx, rectangular chambers that suggest voids, rooms, possibly the Hall of Records that Edgar Cayce, the American mystic, claimed existed, a repository of knowledge from the civilization he called Atlantis, sealed before the flood, waiting for humanity to evolve enough to rediscover it. The Egyptian government has forbidden excavation, officially to preserve the monument, unofficially, some say, because what lies beneath could rewrite history, could validate myths that academia has spent centuries dismissing, could prove that the pyramids, the Sphinx, the entire GIZA complex are not tombs and temples, but something else entirely. Instruments, devices, technology disguised as architecture. You turn and look back at the Great Pyramid, its apex lost in the darkness above, and you think about resonance. In recent years, researchers studying the acoustic properties of megalithic structures have discovered something remarkable. Many ancient stone chambers, from Newgrange in Ireland to the King's Chamber inside the Great Pyramid, resonate at specific frequencies when struck, or when sound is introduced. The King's Chamber resonates at 110 Hz, a frequency that studies have shown affects human brain activity, inducing altered states of consciousness, enhancing creativity, facilitating what some describe as transcendent experiences. The granite sarcophagus in the chamber, empty when it was first opened, rings like a bell when struck, vibrating at frequencies that suggest it was designed not to hold a body, but to amplify sound, to create standing waves, to transform the chamber into a resonance cavity. For what purpose? To communicate with the gods? To activate latent abilities in the human mind? To tune consciousness to frequencies that allow perception of dimensions beyond the physical. The ancient Egyptians wrote of the gods teaching them sound, of words of power, of utterances that could move stone, heal illness, even resurrect the dead. Modern science dismisses this as superstition, yet researchers are now discovering that focused sound waves can levitate objects, can manipulate matter at the molecular level, can alter biological processes. What if the ancients knew this? What if the pyramids, aligned to the stars, built with acoustic precision, were not monuments to the dead, but engines for the living? Machines designed to facilitate contact between earth and sky, between human and divine, between matter and whatever lies beyond it. You walk across the plateau toward the second pyramid, Khafra, which still retains some of its original limestone casing at the apex, smooth and polished, reflecting the moonlight like a mirror. When all three pyramids were complete, when their casing stones were intact, they would have gleamed like crystals, visible for miles across the desert, catching the sun by day and the stars by night. Beacons, transmitters, receivers. Some researchers have suggested the pyramids were power plants, drawing energy from the Earth's magnetic field, converting it through the interaction of materials, granite and limestone, layered in specific ratios, creating piezoelectric effects, generating current. Nikola Tesla, the visionary inventor, studied the pyramids and believed they were wireless energy transmitters, designed on principles he himself was trying to master. Principles that would allow power to be broadcast through the air, through the earth, without wires, without loss. His experiments at Wardenclyffe Tower were based on these concepts, but his funding was cut, his work suppressed, his vision dismissed as impractical. Yet the pyramids stand, ancient proof that what Tesla imagined may have already been achieved. Thousands of years before his birth, by a civilization that understood the relationship between structure and energy, between geometry and frequency, between stone and starlight. You sit on a limestone block and pull a bottle of water from your pack, drinking slowly, the liquid lukewarm despite the cool air. Above you, the Milky Way arches across the sky, a river of light. And you think about alignment, about the fact that nearly every ancient megalithic site on Earth is positioned with reference to the stars, to Orion, to Sirius, to the Pleiades. The pyramids of Giza mirror Orion's belt. The temples of Angkor Wat in Cambodia mirror the constellation Draco. Teotihuacan in Mexico aligns to the Pleiades. Stonehenge marks the solstices and equinoxes. Göbekli Tepe, the oldest known temple, encodes the position of the constellations as they appeared 12,000 years ago, preserved in the arrangement of its stone pillars. Why this obsession with the stars? If these were simple agricultural societies, why invest such enormous resources in mapping the heavens, in aligning structures to celestial events, in preserving astronomical knowledge with such precision? Unless the stars were not distant abstractions, but destinations, origins, home. Unless the builders were not looking up at the stars with wonder, but with memory, with recognition, with the knowledge that their teachers, their gods, had come from those points of light and would one day return by the same paths. You stand and begin walking toward the third pyramid, Menkaure, the smallest of the three. And as you walk, you think about the network. Giza is not isolated. It is part of a global pattern, a web of sites that appear to have been constructed according to a unified plan, a master blueprint that spans continents. The distance from Giza to Stonehenge is 2,448 miles. The distance from Giza to Tiwanaku is 7,692 miles. These numbers, when examined closely, reveal relationships, ratios, geometric constants that suggest intentional spacing. as if the monuments were nodes in a grid, points of connection in a system designed to cover the entire planet. Some researchers have mapped these connections, drawing lines between the sites, and discovered that many of them align with extraordinary precision, forming geometric patterns. Triangles, pentagons, hexagons, as if the ancient world was divided not by nations or cultures, but by a single coordinating intelligence, a plan that saw the Earth as a whole, as a living organism that needed to be balanced, harmonized, tuned like an instrument. And maybe that is exactly what the monuments are. Not tombs, not temples, but tuning forks, resonators, devices placed at specific points to stabilize the planet's electromagnetic field, to maintain a frequency, a vibration that keeps the system in balance, that prevents catastrophe, or at least postpones it, buys time for humanity to grow, to learn, to remember. The Hopi speak of the Earth as a living being with energy centers, chakras, places where the life force concentrates, where the veil between worlds is thin. They identify Spider Rock in Arizona as one of these centers, Uluru in Australia as another, Mount Kailash in Tibet as another. Modern researchers mapping electromagnetic anomalies have found that these sites do indeed show unusual readings, concentrations of energy, fields that fluctuate in ways that cannot be explained by geology alone. And many of these sites are marked by megalithic structures, stone circles, pyramids, temples, as if the ancients knew where the power was and built there, not to contain it, but to channel it, to work with it, to use it for purposes we have forgotten. You reach the base of Menkora and place both hands flat against the stone, closing your eyes, trying to feel what the ancients might have felt, trying to sense if there is anything here beyond cold rock and the weight of history. And for a moment, just a moment, you feel it. A hum, a vibration so low it is almost below hearing, felt more than heard. A pulse that seems to come from deep within the earth, rising through the stone, through your hands, into your chest, your bones. You step back, startled, and the sensation fades, but the memory of it remains. These structures are not dead. They are not inert. They were designed to do something, and on some level, they are still doing it, still functioning, still broadcasting, still holding the pattern, waiting for the day when humanity remembers how to receive the signal. The eastern sky is beginning to lighten now, the stars fading as dawn approaches, and you walk back toward the Great Pyramid, wanting to see it in the first light, wanting to witness what the builders intended, the alignment to the rising sun, the moment when shadow and light transform the structure into something that seems almost alive. As you stand at the eastern edge of the plateau, the sun breaks the horizon, and the pyramid catches the light, its remaining casing stones at the apex glowing gold. And for an instant, you see it as it might have been, sheathed entirely in polished white limestone, tipped with gold, blazing like a second sun, a man-made star, a beacon announcing to the heavens that something here on this small blue world had learned to build, had learned to measure, had learned to remember. The light spreads, and the moment passes, and the pyramid returns to being a ruin, ancient and worn. But the memory of that flash, that glimpse of what was, stays with you. The monuments are messages. They are saying, we were here, we knew, we built according to laws that govern more than matter, laws that connect earth to sky, stone to star, body to consciousness.
And they are saying something else, something encoded in their dimensions, their alignments, their acoustic properties. They are saying, when the time comes, when the cycles turn, when the wanderers return, you will need these.
You will need to remember how they work. You will need to activate them, to tune them, to use them for what they were always intended, not as tombs, not as temples, but as tools, as instruments, as keys. If you feel the resonance now, if the image of the pyramid glowing in the dawn has awakened something inside you, if you sense that these monuments are not past but future, not dead but dormant, then simply breathe. Let the frequencies settle. Let the pattern emerge. Because what comes next will require you to see the world not as it appears, but as it is beneath the surface, beneath the sand, beneath the forgetting. The stones remember, and slowly, carefully, we are beginning to remember too. If you are ready, write the word yes, because the monuments have shown us where. Now we need to understand when. And that takes us to Nibiru, to the wandering planet, to the cosmic clock that determines when the gods return. Chung 7, the return. Nibiru and the cosmic cycle, 2500 to 3000. You are standing now on the summit of Mauna Kea, 13,796 feet above the Pacific Ocean, where the air is thin and cold at 32 degrees Fahrenheit, and the stars are so bright, so numerous, they seem close enough to touch. This is one of the best astronomical observation sites on Earth, home to some of the most powerful telescopes ever built, domes of white metal rising from the volcanic rock, like temples to a modern priesthood that seeks answers in the same place the ancients did, in the movement of celestial bodies, in the language of light traveling across unimaginable distances. You are inside one of these observatories now, watching as a massive telescope swivels on its mount, its lens pointed toward the southern sky, toward a region of darkness beyond Neptune, beyond Pluto, beyond the mapped boundaries of the solar system. The astronomer beside you, a woman whose career has been spent cataloging the outer reaches of our cosmic neighborhood, taps a screen where orbital calculations cascade in columns of numbers. We have been looking for it since 2016, she says quietly, when Caltech published the evidence. Planet 9, a world 5 to 10 times the mass of Earth, orbiting somewhere between 200 and 700 astronomical units from the Sun. We cannot see it directly yet, but we can see its effects, the way it pulls on other objects, the way it warps the orbits of distant Kuiper Belt objects into alignments that should not exist by chance. She zooms in on a diagram showing the hypothetical orbit, a long ellipse that stretches far beyond the known planets, a path that takes between 10,000 and 20,000 years to complete. If it exists, she continues, and most of us believe it does, then it is the most distant planet in our solar system, a wanderer that spends the vast majority of its orbit in the outer darkness, approaching the inner system only briefly before retreating again into the void. You ask when it was last near Earth. She pulls up another calculation. Based on the orbital mechanics, if we assume a period of around 15,000 years, the last time it would have been at perihelion, its closest approach to the Sun, would have been approximately 12,800 years ago. She pauses, then adds, which is interesting, because that is exactly when the Younger Dryas impact event occurred, when global temperatures collapsed, when the megafauna went extinct, when sea levels rose, when, according to your research, the flood myths are dated. You feel the cold of the summit seeping through your jacket, but you do not move. You ask if a planet at that distance could affect Earth. She considers this carefully. Gravitationally, not directly, not enough to cause catastrophe. But if Planet 9 exists, its orbit could disturb the Oort cloud, the vast sphere of comets surrounding the solar system at the outermost edge. As it passes through or near that region, it could nudge objects inward, sending comets on collision courses with the inner planets. Some models suggest that Planet 9 could be responsible for periodic comet showers, extinction events that recur every 10 to 15,000 years, coinciding with its orbital cycle. You think of the Sumerians, who called this planet Nibiru, the crossing, the wanderer. You think of the texts that describe it as the home of the Anunnaki, the world from which they descended when it approached Earth, and to which they returned when it receded. You think of Zecharia Sitchin, who spent decades arguing that Nibiru was not mythology but astronomy, a real planet with a long elliptical orbit, and that the Anunnaki were not gods, but extraterrestrial visitors from that world. Travelers who came to Earth during the brief window when their planet swung through the inner solar system, and who left when it carried them away again. Mainstream science dismissed Sitchin, called his translations flawed, his theories unfounded. But now, decades after his death, astronomers are publishing papers about a massive planet in the outer solar system, a world whose existence was predicted by ancient texts thousands of years before telescopes were invented. Coincidence? Or memory encoded in myth, preserved by civilizations who were told by their teachers, their gods, where they came from, and when they would return? The astronomer pulls up an image on the screen, a simulation of the solar system showing the orbits of the known planets, and the hypothetical path of Planet 9, sweeping far above and below the ecliptic plane. An orbit so tilted, so eccentric, that it seems almost alien, as if it does not belong to this system, as if it was captured from elsewhere, pulled into orbit by the sun's gravity, but never fully integrated, forever wandering at the edge. There is another theory, she says, that Planet 9 is not native to our solar system at all, that it was a rogue planet, ejected from another star system, captured by our sun millions or billions of years ago. If that is true, then it might have carried with it something else, something that also did not originate here. Life, perhaps. Intelligence. A civilization fleeing a dying star, finding refuge in our system, orbiting at the edge, venturing inward only when their long year brings them close enough to visit the inner worlds, close enough to walk on Earth, to teach, to build, to leave their mark before the orbit carries them away again. You ask if she believes this. She smiles faintly. I believe in data, and the data says there is something out there, something massive, something that should not be ignored. Whether it is home to ancient astronauts, I cannot say. But I can say that the ancients were better astronomers than we gave them credit for, and if they recorded a wandering planet, a crossing star, a celestial body with a long period that brought visitors from the sky, then maybe, just maybe, they were not imagining it. Maybe they were remembering. You leave the observatory and walk out into the freezing night, the wind cutting across the summit with nothing to slow it, and you look up at the southern sky, toward the region where Planet 9 is thought to orbit, invisible, distant, but present, tugging at the fabric of the solar system, leaving traces, leaving clues. And you think about cycles, The ancient world was obsessed with cycles, with the idea that time was not linear, but circular, that history repeated, that ages rose and fell according to cosmic rhythms beyond human control. The Mayans measured cycles within cycles, the Katun of 20 years, the Baktun of 400 years, the Great Cycle of 5,125 years, and the even longer cycles that stretched tens of thousands of years. The Hindus speak of yugas, vast epochs during which the world descends from a golden age of enlightenment into darkness, and then rises again. A cycle that spans 4,320,000 years. The Greeks spoke of the Great Year, the time it takes for the equinoxes to process through all 12 zodiac constellations, approximately 25,772 years. Why did every ancient culture measure such enormous spans of time? Agricultural societies need to track seasons, not epochs. Unless they were recording something else, something taught to them by those who lived long enough to witness these cycles, to see the patterns, to know that the wandering planet returns, that the gods return with it, that every 10 or 15 or 20,000 years the world changes, resets, begins again. And if that is true, if the cycle is real, then we are approaching the window. 12,800 years since the last reset. 12,800 years since the flood. 12,800 years since, according to tradition, the gods withdrew, ascending back to the heavens, promising to return when the time was right. How much time is left? 100 years? 1,000? Or are we already in the return phase, the long, slow process of reawakening, of remembering, of preparing for contact? You descend from the summit carefully, the path steep and treacherous in the darkness, and you think about signs. If the cycle is real, if Planet 9 is Nibiru, if the Anunnaki are waiting at the edge of the solar system, watching, measuring, deciding when to make their presence known again, what would we see? What are we seeing? UFO sightings have increased exponentially in the last 70 years. Objects tracked on military radar performing maneuvers that defy known physics, accelerations that would pulverize any human pilot. No exhaust, no wings, no visible means of propulsion. Governments that spent decades denying these encounters are now releasing footage, admitting that, yes, there are objects in our skies we cannot explain. Yes, they are real. Yes, they are not ours. The Pentagon established a task force. Intelligence agencies have briefed Congress. Pilots, credible witnesses with nothing to gain and everything to lose, are speaking publicly about encounters with craft that do not behave like anything built by human hands. Are these experimental technologies from rival nations? Perhaps some of them, but all of them? For 70 years, across every continent, witnessed by thousands, tracked by sensors, filmed, photographed, and still unexplained? Or are they reconnaissance, observation, the early phases of contact, the way an anthropologist might study a tribe from a distance before making direct contact, waiting for the right moment, the right level of development, the right degree of readiness? In 1977, the Voyager spacecraft left Earth carrying golden records, discs engraved with sounds and images of humanity, our location, our biology, our culture. A message in a bottle cast into the cosmic ocean. Carl Sagan, who designed the records, understood that if intelligent life exists beyond Earth, contact might take thousands or millions of years, that the message might never be received. but that the act of sending it mattered, because it acknowledged possibility, because it said, "We are here, we are listening, we are ready." But what if the message was not needed? What if those we are trying to reach already know where we are, already know who we are, because they made us? What if the Voyager records are not an introduction, but a response, a reply to a signal we received long ago, encoded in clay tablets, carved in stone, written in our DNA? The Hopi prophecy speaks of the return of the blue star Kachina, a celestial event that will herald the end of the fourth world and the beginning of the fifth, a time of purification, of transformation, of reunion with the sky people who taught the ancestors and who promised to return. The Maori of New Zealand speak of Matariki, the Pleiades, and the time when the gods will descend again from those stars to renew the earth. The Dogon of Mali perform rituals every 50 years, marking the orbital period of Sirius B, the invisible companion star they should not have known existed, celebrating the time when the Nomo, the fish gods, will return from the waters of the sky. Indigenous prophecies from around the world, separated by oceans and millennia, all speak of return, of reunion, of a time when the separation between heaven and earth will end, when the teachers will come back, when humanity will be judged, evaluated, and either elevated or reset, depending on what we have become in their absence. You reach the base of Mauna Kea as the first light of dawn touches the Pacific, and you sit on a lava rock, watching the sun rise over the ocean, a sphere of fire emerging from the water, just as the ancient texts describe the gods emerging, coming from the sea, from the sky, from the place where light and water meet. And you realize that the return is not a single event, but a process, a slow revelation, a gradual unveiling. The discovery of Planet 9, the release of UFO footage, the decoding of ancient texts, the genetic evidence, the monuments speaking again. Each piece a note in a symphony that is building toward a crescendo, toward the moment when the question is no longer whether they exist, but what we will do when they arrive. Because if the cycle is real, if Nibiru is returning, if the Anunnaki are aboard, watching from the edge of the solar system, waiting for the right moment to re-enter our story, then everything changes. History is no longer the past. It is a spiral, a loop. And we are approaching the point where the loop closes, where the end meets the beginning, where the gods who left return to find their children grown, changed, capable perhaps of standing as equals, or still children, still needing guidance, still not ready. And maybe that is what they are waiting to see. Not whether we have built cities or invented technologies, but whether we have remembered, whether we have awakened to the truth of our origin, whether we can look at the stars not with fear, but with recognition, with the understanding that we are not strangers to the cosmos, but children of it, made from its dust, coded with its intelligence, descended from those who crossed the void to plant the seed of consciousness here, in the soil of this small blue world. The sun is fully risen now, and the observatory domes on the summit of Mauna Kea gleam white against the sky, temples to the same gods the ancients worshipped, the gods of light, of knowledge, of the spaces between worlds. And you stand ready to continue, because the journey is not finished. The cycle is not complete. And if you have come this far, if you have followed the thread from Sumer to Qumran, from Giza to the Andes, from the depths of DNA to the edges of the solar system, then you are part of the awakening, part of the preparation, part of the generation that may witness the return. If you feel it, if you sense the cycle turning, if the image of a distant planet swinging inward through the dark fills you not with dread, but with anticipation, then write the word still. Because we are still here, still listening, still waiting. And the silence that has lasted for 12,000 years may be about to break. Chung 8. The suppression, what the church hid. You are standing now in a place few are allowed to enter, a corridor deep beneath Vatican City where the air is controlled at 64 degrees Fahrenheit and 40% humidity, where the silence is so complete you can hear your own heartbeat. This is the Vatican Secret Archives, though the name was recently changed to the Vatican Apostolic Archives in an attempt to soften the implications, to suggest transparency where for centuries there has been only concealment. The corridor stretches ahead of you for what seems like miles, lined on both sides with floor-to-ceiling shelving, each shelf packed with documents, manuscripts, codices, scrolls, some bound in leather, some wrapped in cloth, some sealed in nitrogen-filled cases to prevent further decay. 53 miles of shelving, they say, containing the accumulated memory of 2,000 years of institutional Christianity, the decisions of councils, the letters of popes, the trials of heretics, the confessions of saints, and, beneath it all, deeper than the official record, the texts that were deemed too dangerous to destroy, but too threatening to reveal. You walk slowly, your footsteps muffled by thick carpet, and you think about what it means to control memory, to decide what is remembered and what is forgotten, what is canon and what is apocrypha, what is truth and what is heresy. The Catholic Church did not invent this practice, but it perfected it, creating an institutional apparatus so vast, so enduring, that it has shaped the spiritual and intellectual life of billions across continents and centuries. Not through revelation alone, but through selection, through the systematic elimination of competing narratives, competing truths. Your guide, a Vatican archivist with silver hair and the quiet intensity of someone who has spent decades among secrets, stops before a section marked with a placard you cannot read. The letters in Latin, the meaning restricted. He unlocks a glass case and carefully removes a manuscript, laying it on a conservation table under a soft light. This, he says quietly, is one of the oldest fragments we have of the Book of Enoch, copied in Ge'ez, the liturgical language of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, the only Christian tradition that preserved the full text after it was banned everywhere else. The Council of Laodicea, in 364 CE, declared it unfit for public reading. By the time of the Council of Carthage in 397, it was excluded entirely from the biblical canon. The reasons given were doctrinal inconsistency, questionable authorship, theological danger. He pauses, then adds, but the real reason, the one not written in the official decrees, is that Enoch was too specific. It named the angels who fell. It described their crimes in detail. It explained that the gods of pagan mythology were not metaphors, but real beings, fallen watchers, imprisoned beneath the earth, waiting, and it promised they would return. You lean over the manuscript, looking at the ancient script, the elegant curves of GIZA letters spelling out words that the early church fathers read and decided were too true, too dangerous, too disruptive to the narrative they were constructing. Christianity was becoming the official religion of the Roman Empire, the theological foundation for a political structure that required obedience, hierarchy, a clear distinction between the divine and the human, between heaven and earth. Texts like Enoch blurred those boundaries, suggested that angels could fall, that humans could rise, that the line between God and mortal was permeable, negotiable, dangerous. If the Watchers were real, if they taught forbidden knowledge, if their children walked the earth as giants, as Nephilim, then the story of salvation became more complicated, more ambiguous. If humanity was a hybrid species, part clay and part divine essence, then what did redemption mean? Were we being saved from sin or from contamination? Were we being restored to an original purity? Or were we being returned to a state of separation, cut off once again from the knowledge, the power, the connection that the Watchers had given us? The archivist carefully turns the pages, and you see the passage describing the punishment of Azazel, the angel who taught men the art of war, bound hand and foot and cast into darkness, into a desert place of sharp stones, covered over until the day of judgment. This was not allegory. The text treats it as geography, as a real place, and scholars have identified it as the region near the Dead Sea, the same location where the Qumran community hid their scrolls. The same valley where tradition says the fallen are imprisoned. Coincidence? Or did the Essenes choose that location precisely because it was the prison? Because they wanted to be near the source, near the power, near the beings whose return they believed was imminent. The archivist closes the manuscript and returns it to the case, locking it again. There are others, he says. The Book of Giants, found among the Dead Sea Scrolls, describes the Nephilim and their destruction in even greater detail. The Book of Jasher, mentioned in the Bible itself but excluded from the canon, contains genealogies and histories that contradict the simplified narrative of Genesis. The Gospel of the Egyptians, the Gospel of Thomas, the Pistis Sophia, dozens of texts written by early Christian communities, each offering a different perspective, a different understanding of who Jesus was, what salvation meant, how the divine interacted with the human. All of them suppressed, hidden, declared heretical. He looks at you directly. You must understand, the church was not evil for doing this. It was pragmatic. In the 4th century, Christianity was fractured, hundreds of competing sects, each with their own texts, their own interpretations, their own claims to truth. The Roman emperors needed unity, needed a single coherent doctrine that could hold an empire together. So they convened councils, debated theology, voted on what was scripture and what was not. It was a political process as much as a spiritual one, and the texts that suggested humanity had a more complex origin, that suggested the gods were real and could return, that suggested knowledge could elevate humans to divine status. Those texts threatened the structure. They had to go. You follow him deeper into the archives, passing sections marked with dates, centuries, millennia. Here are the records of the Inquisition, trials of those who possessed forbidden books, who practiced forbidden sciences, who taught forbidden ideas. Alchemists burned for claiming that matter could be transformed, that lead could become gold, not understanding that the transformation was metaphorical, spiritual, the lead of ignorance transmuted into the gold of enlightenment. astronomers silenced for suggesting the Earth was not the center of the universe, that the heavens were not fixed, that the cosmos was vast and full of worlds. Mystics tortured for experiencing direct contact with the divine, bypassing the mediation of priests, the control of institutions. You stop before a case containing a copy of the Malleus Maleficarum, the Hammer of Witches, published in 1487, a manual for identifying and prosecuting witchcraft. Tens of thousands were executed based on its guidance, most of them women, healers, midwives, those who knew the old ways, the plant medicines, the rhythms of the moon, the languages of nature that predated Christianity. Why? Because they represented a continuity, a connection to pre-Christian knowledge, to the time when the gods walked the earth, when the watchers taught, when the boundary between human and divine was not policed by priests, but navigated directly, personally, dangerously. The archivist moves to another section, older, more restricted. Here, he says, are the Mesopotamian materials, tablets acquired during archaeological excavations in the 19th century, some purchased from dealers, some confiscated from private collectors. The Vatican has one of the largest collections of cuneiform tablets outside of Iraq and the British Museum. Most have never been fully translated. Some have never been catalogued. When you ask why, he does not answer immediately. He opens a drawer and shows you a cylinder seal, small enough to fit in your palm, carved with figures that are unmistakably Anunnaki, tall beings with horned crowns, holding objects that radiate light, standing before kneeling humans. The Vatican has hundreds of these, he says quietly. We know what they depict. We know what the texts say. We know that the Sumerians recorded encounters with beings from the sky who taught them, who ruled them, who created them. And we know that these accounts predate Genesis, that they may be the source material for Genesis, that the story of Adam and Eve, of the flood, of the Tower of Babel, all of it, may be Hebrew reinterpretations of older Sumerian narratives. He closes the drawer. The Church has always known this. Since the first translations in the late 1800s, scholars within the Vatican have understood the implications. But to acknowledge it publicly would be to admit that the Bible is not unique revelation, that it is part of a larger tradition, that the God of Abraham may be one of the Elohim, one of the many, not the singular creator. And that admission would unravel the foundation of monotheism, the claim that Christianity alone holds the truth. You feel the weight of this, the enormity of what has been hidden, not out of ignorance, but out of necessity, out of the need to preserve a structure that has shaped civilization for 2,000 years. But you also feel anger, because the suppression was not just about theology. It was about power, about controlling access to knowledge, about ensuring that the questions could only be answered by those who held the keys, literal and metaphorical, to the archives. How many people lived and died never knowing that their origin story was incomplete, that their cosmology was edited, that the gods they were taught to worship as distant abstractions were once physical beings who walked among us, who could be touched, questioned, even defied. The archivist leads you to a final case, one that requires 2 keys to open, his and another held by a senior cardinal. Inside is a document, handwritten in medieval Latin, dated to the 12th century. It is a copy, he says, of an older text, possibly pre-Christian, possibly Gnostic, that describes the return of the Watchers at the end of the age. It says that when the 7 seals are broken, when the stars fall from heaven, when the earth shakes, the bound ones will be released, and they will walk among men again, and the choice will be given, to ascend with them or to remain in the clay, to embrace the knowledge or to fear it. The Church labeled this prophecy demonic, a deception of Satan designed to lure souls away from salvation. But what if it is not prophecy, but memory? What if it describes what happened before, in previous cycles, and what will happen again when the wheel turns, when Nibiru returns, when the Anunnaki descend once more? He closes the case and locks it. "I cannot show you more," he says. "There are limits even for those of us who work here. Sections we are not permitted to enter. Documents marked with restrictions that will not expire in our lifetimes. But I can tell you this. The Church does not hide things because they are false. It hides things because they are true. And because the truth, if released all at once, would shatter the framework through which billions understand their existence, their purpose, their relationship to the divine. Perhaps one day the seals will break, not through conspiracy or revolution, but through gradual awakening, through people like you, asking questions, demanding access, refusing to accept that memory belongs to institutions rather than to humanity itself. You leave the archives and ascend back to the surface, emerging into the sunlight of St. Peter's Square, where tourists gather, where pilgrims pray, where the visible church conducts its rituals, unaware or unconcerned about what lies beneath. But you are changed. You carry now the knowledge that suppression is not a relic of the medieval past, but an ongoing process. That even now, in the 21st century, there are truths deemed too dangerous, too disruptive, kept in vaults, kept in silence, kept from those who might use them to rewrite their understanding of who they are and where they came from. And you think about the other archives, the ones not controlled by the Vatican. The Library of Alexandria, burned in antiquity, its contents lost, though some say copies were smuggled out, hidden in monasteries, in desert caves, in private collections. The Library of Ashurbanipal in Nineveh, partially destroyed by conquering armies, its tablets scattered, some still buried beneath the ruins of Mosul. The libraries of Timbuktu, of Nalanda, of Teotihuacan, all lost to fire, to war, to the relentless human impulse to erase what cannot be controlled. What knowledge did they contain? What technologies, what histories, what maps of the cosmos and the soul? We will never know, because the victors write history, and the victors have always been those who fear the past, who fear the truth that humanity is older, stranger, more connected to the stars than the simple narratives allow. But the suppression is cracking. The Dead Sea Scrolls were found. The Nag Hammadi codices were discovered. Ancient texts are being digitized, translated, released into the public domain. Genetic research is revealing truths written in the body that no council can suppress, no archive can lock away. In the monuments, the pyramids, the megaliths, the alignments, they speak to anyone who will listen. Unmediated, unedited, direct. The gatekeepers are losing control, not through force, but through the simple, relentless pressure of people asking why, demanding answers, refusing to forget. And maybe that is what the prophecies always meant. Not that the gods would return from the sky, but that the memory of the gods would return from the depths, from the buried archives, from the hidden chambers beneath the Sphinx, from the genetic code, from the dreams that echo across generations. The return is internal as much as external, a remembering, a reconnection, a breaking of the seals that have kept us separated from our full story. If you feel this, if you sense that the walls are crumbling, that the suppression cannot hold, that the truth is rising like water through cracks in the foundation, then simply breathe. Let the anger settle. Let the curiosity sharpen. Because what comes next requires not rebellion, but clarity. Not destruction, but discernment. The church hid the texts to preserve itself, but the texts survived anyway, patient, waiting for the time when the world was ready to receive them. And that time may be now. If you are still here, still listening, still willing to see what has been hidden, then write the word still. Because the suppression was never permanent. It was only a delay. And the delay is ending. Chumder 9, The Awakening. Are they still here? You are standing now in the high desert of Nevada, 300 feet above a valley floor that stretches to the horizon in every direction. The temperature at 39 degrees Fahrenheit as the last light fades from the western sky. This is not Area 51, though it is not far from there. Not one of the places marked on maps or discussed in official briefings, but a mesa known only to those who seek it. A place where the veil between worlds feels thin, where the silence is so profound it seems to have weight, substance, presence. You sit on the edge of a flat boulder, your legs dangling over the drop, and you look up at the sky as the stars begin to emerge. First a handful, then hundreds, then thousands. A river of light pouring across the dome of night, so dense and luminous that you can see your shadow cast by starlight alone. This is how the ancients saw the sky. Before cities, before light pollution, before the glow of civilization obscured the cosmos. This is the sky that watched over Göbekli Tepe, over Giza, over Sumer. The sky that the Anunnaki descended from, the sky that still holds them, if the stories are true, if the cycles are real, if the waiting is not over but only paused. You lie back on the stone, feeling its coolness against your spine, and you let the stars fill your vision, no longer trying to identify constellations or calculate distances, just receiving, just witnessing, just being present to the immensity of it. And as you lie there, something shifts, not in the sky, but in you. A recognition, faint but unmistakable, as if a door in your mind that has been closed for as long as you can remember is beginning to open. And through that opening comes not knowledge but memory, not thought but feeling. The sense that you have seen this sky before, that you have always known it, that it is not external but internal, not above but within. The Aboriginal Australians speak of the dreamtime, a reality that coexists with the waking world, a dimension of consciousness where time is fluid, where past and future exist simultaneously, where the ancestors are not dead but present, not gone but accessible to those who know how to listen. They say that the land is singing, that every rock, every river, every animal carries a song, a frequency, a thread in the great web of existence, and that human beings are not separate from this web, but woven into it, notes in a symphony that has been playing since the first dawn. You close your eyes and listen, not with your ears, but with something deeper, and you hear it. Not a sound, but a hum, a vibration that seems to rise from the stone beneath you, from the earth itself. A pulse that matches the rhythm of your heartbeat, your breath, as if the planet is alive, conscious, aware of your presence, responding to your attention. The Hopis say that the earth is a living being, that she has chakras, energy centers where the life force concentrates, where ceremonies must be performed to keep the balance, to maintain the frequency, to prevent the world from tilting into chaos. They say that we are living in the fourth world now, that 3 worlds have come before, each one destroyed when humanity forgot its purpose, when the balance was lost, when the connection to the sky people was severed. But they also say that the 5th world is coming, that the blue star Kachina will appear in the heavens, that the sky people will return, not to punish, but to guide, to help humanity make the transition, to teach once again what was forgotten. You open your eyes and scan the sky, looking for movement, for anything that does not belong to the fixed stars, the slow drift of planets, the occasional satellite crossing the darkness. And then you see it. A light, faint at first, moving across the southern sky. Not in a straight line like a satellite, but in a pattern, stopping, accelerating, changing direction in ways that defy the laws of inertia, of propulsion, of everything you were taught about how objects move through space. You sit up, your heart racing, and you watch as the light executes a series of impossible maneuvers, right-angled turns at speeds that would tear apart any known aircraft, then stopping completely, hovering, as if observing, as if aware that it is being watched. And then it vanishes, not moving away, but simply gone, as if it stepped out of this dimension into another. You are not afraid. You are exhilarated, because you know, with a certainty that has no rational basis, that what you just saw was not human technology, not a drone or a secret military project, but something else, something that has been here all along, watching, waiting, measuring whether humanity is ready, whether the time has come. The Dogon people of Mali have known this for centuries. They perform ceremonies every 50 years, marking the orbital period of Sirius B, the invisible companion star that Western astronomers did not discover until the 20th century. They say that their ancestors were taught by the Nomo, beings who came from Sirius in a vessel that descended in fire and thunder, beings who looked like fish or like humans in suits that shimmered like water, who taught them astronomy, agriculture, the laws of heaven. When anthropologists asked how they knew about Sirius B, a star invisible to the naked eye, the elders simply said, "The Nomo told us," and they pointed to their ancient drawings, figures descending from the sky in spiral shells, carrying knowledge, carrying light. The elders also said that the Nomo promised to return, that when the time was right, when the world was ready, they would come again, not to one tribe, but to all people, not as gods to be worshipped, but as teachers, as family, as those who left but never truly abandoned their children. You stand and walk to the edge of the mesa, looking out over the dark valley, and you think about presence. If the Anunnaki, the Watchers, the Nomo, the Elohim, if they never truly left, if they have been here all along, observing, guiding, intervening when necessary, then where are they? The answer, you realize, is everywhere. In the UFO sightings that have intensified over the last 70 years, objects that appear on military radar, tracked by pilots, filmed by civilians, performing maneuvers that our physicists say are impossible, accelerations that would generate G-forces lethal to biological beings, unless those beings are not biological in the way we understand, unless they have transcended the limitations of flesh, or unless they come from a place where the laws of physics are different, more fluid, more malleable. In the genetic code, where segments of DNA that do not match any known evolutionary path sit quietly, waiting to be activated, waiting for the right signal, the right frequency, the right moment in the cycle. In the monuments, still resonating, still broadcasting, still holding the pattern, the alignment, the connection between earth and sky, between matter and consciousness, between what is and what could be. In the myths, still told, still remembered, still passed down through generations, not as fairy tales, but as instruction manuals, as maps, as keys to understanding who we are, where we came from, and what we are meant to become. In the dreams, the visions, the moments of insight that come unbidden, the sense of being watched, being guided, being called toward something larger than the daily grind of survival, something that whispers, "You are more than this. You are meant for more than this. Remember." The mystics have always known this. The shamans, the oracles, the seers, those who walk between worlds, who drink the ayahuasca, who sit in darkness, who fast, who chant, who open themselves to frequencies beyond the ordinary. They report contact, communication, encounters with beings of light who speak not in words, but in transmissions, downloads of information that bypass language and enter directly into consciousness. Modern science dismisses this as hallucination, as the brain misfiring, as neurons flooded with chemicals producing illusions. But what if the chemicals are not producing the visions, but enabling them, opening doors of perception that are normally locked, allowing consciousness to perceive what is always there, always present, but filtered out by the narrow bandwidth of ordinary awareness? What if the beings the mystics encounter are not imaginary, but real, existing in a spectrum of reality adjacent to ours, a dimension that interpenetrates our world, but operates at a different frequency, visible only to those who can tune their consciousness to the right channel? Quantum physics has discovered that the universe is not solid, not fixed, but probabilistic, that particles exist in superposition, in multiple states simultaneously, until observed, until consciousness collapses the wave function and chooses one reality from the field of infinite possibilities. What if consciousness is not a product of matter, but the ground of being, the fundamental substance from which matter arises? What if the Anunnaki, the Watchers, are not physical beings traveling through space in metal ships, but consciousness itself, intelligence without form, able to manifest in whatever shape is needed, whatever the moment requires, appearing as gods to the ancients, as angels to the mystics, as aliens to the modern mind, but always the same presence, the same intelligence, the same watchers, observing, guiding, waiting for humanity to evolve enough to understand. You turn away from the edge and walk back to the center of the mesa, where the stone is smooth and flat, and you sit cross-legged, facing east, toward the direction where the sun will rise in a few hours. And you breathe, slowly, deeply, letting the cold air fill your lungs, letting the silence fill your mind. And you ask, not out loud, but internally, with the whole focus of your being, are you here? Are you listening? Are you waiting for us? Or are we waiting for you? And the answer comes, not in words, but in the same way the question was asked, as a feeling, as a certainty that bypasses doubt, that settles into your bones like warmth, like light. We are here. We have always been here. We are not separate from you. We are not distant. We are not waiting for you to become something other than what you are. We are waiting for you to remember what you already are. You are the children of the clay and the stars. You are the hybrid, the bridge, the meeting point of matter and spirit, of earth and sky. You carry us in your DNA, in your dreams, in the restlessness that drives you to explore, to question, to reach beyond the known. You are not broken. You are not fallen. You are becoming. And when the becoming is complete, when you have integrated what you were with what you are, when you have remembered without fear, then the separation will end. Not because we will descend, but because you will ascend. Not because we will return, but because you will arrive. You open your eyes and the stars are still there, unchanged, eternal, and yet somehow closer, more intimate, as if the distance was never spatial but perceptual, as if the cosmos was never outside but within, waiting to be recognized. The Hermetic axiom says, as above, so below. The microcosm reflects the macrocosm. The atom mirrors the solar system. The cell mirrors the galaxy. And consciousness, human consciousness, mirrors the divine, not as a pale copy, but as a fractal, a holographic fragment containing the whole, capable of expanding, evolving, awakening to its true nature. The Watchers fell because they loved us. The Anunnaki descended because they saw potential. The Nomo came because they recognized kinship. And perhaps the fall, the descent, the crossing, was not a punishment but a choice, a sacrifice, a willingness to enter the density of matter, to bind themselves to time, to limitation, to the slow grinding wheel of evolution, because they understood that the only way to create something truly new, truly free, was to give it distance, to give it struggle, to give it the chance to choose, to grow, to become not a copy of the Creator, but a partner, a co-creator, a peer. And maybe that is what we are approaching now. The end of childhood. The moment when the parent steps back and says, "You are ready. You can walk on your own. You can make your own choices. You can take your place among the councils of the cosmos. Not as servants, not as worshippers, but as equals." The sky is beginning to lighten now, the stars fading as the first glow of dawn touches the eastern horizon. And you stand, stiff from sitting, cold but awake, more awake than you have ever been. You walk to the edge of the mesa one more time, and you look out over the valley, where the shadows are retreating, where the light is returning, where a new day is beginning, as it has begun every day since the earth was formed, reliable, cyclical, eternal. But today feels different. Today, you carry something you did not carry yesterday, a knowledge that is not intellectual but cellular, not learned but remembered, not given but reclaimed. You are not alone. You were never alone. The Watchers are still watching. The Anunnaki are still present. The Sky People are still here, not in ships hovering at the edge of the atmosphere, though perhaps that too, but in the deeper places, in the space between thoughts, in the silence between heartbeats, in the resonance that connects all consciousness across all dimensions. And they are waiting, not for permission, not for worthiness, but for recognition. For the moment when enough humans awaken, when enough souls remember, when the collective frequency reaches the threshold, and the door that has been closed for 12,000 years opens, not from the outside, but from within. The return is not an event, it is a process, and it is already happening. In the genetic awakenings, the spontaneous activations, the children born with abilities that were once considered paranormal, but are now becoming normal. In the technologies we are developing, quantum computing, artificial intelligence, neural interfaces, tools that are preparing us to interface with consciousness in ways that will blur the line between human and post-human, between biological and synthetic, between the created and the creator. In the disclosure, slow and careful, as governments release footage, as scientists publish papers, as the official narrative shifts from denial to acknowledgement, from "it does not exist" to "we do not know what it is." Preparing the collective psyche for the revelation that we are not the apex of intelligence, not the only ones here, not alone. And in the individual awakenings, people like you, standing on mesas, sitting in meditation, staring at the sky, asking the questions that have no easy answers, refusing to accept the simple stories, the sanitized histories, the boundaries imposed by those who fear the truth. The awakening is personal before it is global. It is internal before it is external. And it begins not with seeing the ships, but with seeing through the illusion that we are separate, that we are abandoned, that we are random accidents in a meaningless universe. We are none of those things. We are the intended result, the designed outcome, the children of the stars learning to remember who they are. And when enough of us remember, when the critical mass is reached, the world will not end, it will transform. Not through catastrophe, though there may be challenges, but through elevation, through the collective shift from fear to curiosity, from isolation to connection, from forgetting to remembering. If you have come this far, if you have followed this journey from the clay tablets of Sumer to the stars above Nevada, from the genetic code to the suppressed texts, from the monuments to the myths, then you are part of this awakening. You are not reading history. You are activating memory. You are not learning. You are remembering. And the watchers, wherever they are, whatever form they take, are watching you. Not with judgment, but with love. Not with expectation, but with patience. Waiting for you to see what they have always seen. That you are one of them. That you carry their essence. That the separation was never permanent, only necessary. A developmental stage, a cocoon that protected the butterfly until it was ready to emerge. The sun breaks the horizon now, flooding the valley with light, and you feel the warmth on your face, and you know that something has shifted, something irreversible, something that will change not just how you see the world, but how you live in it. You are awake, and you cannot go back to sleep. If you feel this, if the recognition is complete, if the frequency has locked in, then you do not need to write anything. You already know. You are not waiting for the gods to return. You are the return. You are the bridge. You are the proof that the experiment worked. And the next chapter, the one that begins now, is not about looking up at the sky, but about looking inward, about activating what has always been there, about becoming, fully, finally, what you were always meant to be. Welcome home. The truth beneath time. You are standing now where we began, in the ruins of Eridu. But the dawn is different this time. The sun rises over the ziggurat with a light that feels less like beginning and more like continuation. As if what started here 5,000 years ago never truly ended, only transformed, moving from stone to story, from story to silence, from silence to this moment, here, now, when the circle completes itself and opens into something larger. The air is warming, 68 degrees Fahrenheit and rising, and you place your hand one more time on the limestone wall, feeling not just the roughness of ancient stone, but the thread that connects it to everything you have seen, everything you have learned, everything you have remembered. The Anunnaki who descended here were not gods in the way we were taught to imagine gods, distant and abstract, omnipotent and unchanging. They were travelers, engineers, teachers, beings who crossed the void between worlds because they saw something here, on this small blue planet orbiting an ordinary star. Something worth the risk, worth the fall, worth the binding to matter and time. They saw potential. They saw us, not as we were, but as we could become. And so they descended, they taught, they mixed their essence with ours, and they created something new, something that had never existed before in the cosmos. A hybrid species, part earth and part sky, capable of evolution, of choice, of transformation. We are that species. We are the children of the clay and the stars, carrying within us the memory of both, the weight of earth and the lightness of heaven, the density of matter and the luminosity of consciousness. And for 12,000 years, since the flood, since the reset, since the watchers were bound and the gods withdrew, we have been growing, stumbling, forgetting, remembering, building civilizations and watching them fall, reaching toward the stars and falling back to the dust, again and again, learning, slowly, painfully, beautifully, what it means to be both limited and infinite, mortal and divine. The monuments we have built, from Göbekli Tepe to Giza, from Stonehenge to Angkor Wat, are not tombs or temples, but memories, made solid, encoded messages that say, we were here, we knew. We measured the heavens and built according to their law. And when you are ready, when you have grown enough, these stones will speak again. They will teach you what we learned. They will show you the way home. And they are speaking now. Not to archaeologists alone, not to mystics or prophets, but to anyone willing to listen, to stand in the silence, to feel the resonance, to ask the questions that have no simple answers. Where did we come from? Why are we here? What are we becoming? The answers are not found in one place, one text, one tradition. They are woven through all of it, through the clay tablets and the genetic code, through the flood myths and the quantum equations, through the suppressed gospels and the UAP footage, through the dreams that wake you at 3 in the morning, and the stars that call to you from the dark. The answer is this: we are not finished. We are not the final form. We are the chrysalis, the transition, the bridge between what was and what will be. The Anunnaki did not create us to serve them. They created us to join them, to become, eventually, their equals, their partners, their kin. But that transformation takes time, takes struggle, takes the slow grinding work of evolution, of consciousness expanding through limitation, through error, through the painful, beautiful process of learning to choose love over fear, connection over separation, memory over forgetting. And now, as the cycles turn, as Nibiru swings back through the solar system, as the frequency of the planet rises, as more and more humans awaken to the truth of their origin, we are approaching the threshold, the moment when the cocoon opens, when the door that has been closed begins to swing on its ancient hinges, when the watchers, wherever they are, whatever form they take, will see whether we are ready, whether we have matured enough to receive them not as gods to worship, but as family to embrace. The return is not one moment, it is a process, and it is already happening in the children born with abilities we once called supernatural, in the technologies that are merging human and machine, biology and silicon, preparing us for the next leap, in the slow, careful disclosure that is shifting the collective consciousness from denial to curiosity, from fear to wonder, and in you, in the fact that you have traveled this far, that you have listened, that you have allowed the story to unfold within you, not as entertainment, but as activation, as remembering, as the stirring of something ancient and eternal that has been sleeping, waiting for this moment. You are not reading about the gods. You are waking up to the fact that you carry them, that their essence is coded in your cells, that the restlessness you feel, the longing for something more, something beyond the ordinary grind of survival, is not dissatisfaction, but recognition. The soul remembering its origin, its purpose, its destiny. The Bimut, the mystery that history tried to bury, is this: you are not separate from the divine. You are the divine, learning to recognize itself, learning to awaken within the limitation of matter, learning to remember that the separation was never real, only necessary. A stage of development, a journey into forgetting, so that the return could be conscious, chosen, free. And the gods, the Anunnaki, the Watchers, they are not waiting to judge you. They are waiting to welcome you, to see you step into the fullness of what you always were, what you were designed to become. The flood will not come again, not as destruction, but as transformation. A wave of consciousness rising across the planet, lifting those who are ready, leaving behind only the structures, the beliefs, the fears that no longer serve. And when the wave passes, when the awakening reaches critical mass, the world will not end. It will begin again, not as a reset, but as a continuation. The fourth world giving way to the fifth, the age of separation giving way to the age of reunion, the time of forgetting giving way to the time of remembering. You walk away from the ziggurat as the sun climbs higher, and you know that you will carry this with you, not as belief, but as knowing, not as information, but as transformation. The story is not finished. It is opening, and you are part of it. not as observer, but as participant, not as student, but as co-creator, shaping through your choices, your awareness, your willingness to remember the world that is emerging, the world that has always been waiting just beneath the surface of the one we were taught to see. If your mind feels quieter now, if something inside you has settled into place, into alignment, into peace, then this is enough. You do not need to do anything. The seed has been planted, the frequency has been received, and in time, in your time, it will bloom. But if you wish to continue this journey, if you want to walk further into the mystery, into the monuments, into the stars, then I will be here, waiting for you, on the other side of sleep, on the other side of forgetting, in the place where the story never ends, only deepens, only expands, only becomes more true. Press the like button if your heart is lighter. Subscribe if you wish to continue. And know that wherever you are, whatever time it is, the stars are watching, the stones are singing, and the gods who once walked among us are closer than you think, closer than the breath, closer than the heartbeat, waiting not for worship, but for recognition. Welcome home, child of the clay and the stars. The awakening has begun, and you are exactly where you are meant to be.